Our story begins on a battlefield where countless bodies lay scattered across the ground. Amid those corpses, there was a young man leaning on his sword. Many of his comrades were dead there, bleeding heavily, and all he could do was breathe as the rain fell upon his body. He couldn't believe that so many had died and began to lament it, thinking it was a clear blunder on Ahayuti's part, until he was suddenly startled by a voice that revealed it had not expected to find a human so powerful. The swordsman didn't look even a little pleased to see that the man was still alive. Standing beneath him was the one who had spoken, a gigantic figure known as the Great Ahayut. After appearing before the Empire 20 days earlier, he had caused widespread destruction for reasons unknown, and he was the last of the three giants. The swordsman forcefully stomped on Ahayut's nose, making it very clear that because of him, half of the Empire had become a cemetery. He wanted to understand why that giant was still alive. Ahayute calmly told the swordsman not to worry, as he wouldn't be alive much longer. Speaking in the third person, he said he would soon return to his own side. The swordsman thought that was wonderful, because the friends who had died before that giant would be waiting for him. Ahayute didn't understand what the warrior meant by friends, and the swordsman clarified that he was referring to the other two who had come before him, revealing that one had been turned into crackling by a temperamental red dragon. The other had been sealed for eternity by an old man named Lorahan. The swordsman was so enraged at the giant that he treated him like a bag of trash. Ahayute didn't want the swordsman to hide the truth behind shallow words, for the children of the stars shared their senses with one another. They knew their opponents had been annihilated together, which meant that strong people like the swordsman himself no longer existed in that land. The swordsman told the giant to shut up because he was still alive. The giant warned him not to think too highly of himself, as his time was coming. Ahayute even admitted that he would have been happy if the swordsman had realized his own abilities earlier and put more effort into his training. He would have become an even greater obstacle to their desire. Hearing this only made the swordsman angrier, as he felt that everything being said was nothing but endless nonsense. He revealed that he had lived a terrible life, and all he wanted now was for the giant to shut up and die already. The giant thought he was a good human, and that it was fine to be proud, but in the end, the swordsman's world would be swallowed by starlight and vanish. Losing his patience, the swordsman swiftly beheaded him. Ahayut's head began to roll, and the swordsman was left lost in thought. No matter what he did, what had already happened could not be changed. Soon, memories of his comrades began to flood his mind. He remembered a young man with scars on his face the moment they began to fight, and the moment he saw that same comrade die. The swordsman wondered if his comrades were truly there. Looking at their dead bodies, he thought they were all nothing but fools. He couldn't understand what kind of pride had driven them to fight to the death. They weren't strong just because he was strong. He wished they had accepted their own weakness and retreated, but in the end, they had remained fools until the very end. He couldn't understand it, especially since the giants had been able to withstand the aura of the strongest sword in the Empire. He wanted to know why his sword was the only one that had worked. If that hadn't been the case, there would have been no way for a soldier still in training to be on the front lines, and they wouldn't have died first. The swordsman had no answer to that question, and it didn't sit well with him at all until he heard a voice asking if anyone was there. His eyes widened at that moment. The voice explained that it couldn't move because of its injuries. The swordsman recognized the voice and quickly stood up. He couldn't believe that person was still alive and rushed toward them. It was his great commander, leaning against a rock. She truly was a great commander, and the swordsman saw that she had lost an arm. Her name was Adishan. For someone who had been in command, he wanted to understand how this had happened. The swordsman's name was Ronan. She reminded him that he was just a corporal and nothing special, but the most important thing was that she wanted to know whether Ahayute was dead. Ronan confirmed that he had killed him and said the body wasn't far away. Adishan then understood that he was truly dead, and tears began to fall as she thanked Ronan for it. Seeing how grateful she was, he asked if she could hear a request. He explained that it concerned the cleanup of the trainee soldiers. Normally they were burned or abandoned, but he wanted those soldiers to be treated properly this time. Adishan admitted she wasn't sure, since he was more alive than she was and could do it better himself. Ronan said that he would like to do it, but suddenly he began to cough. Blood appeared in his hand, and he wondered how he was more alive than she was as his voice started to falter. He told Adishan that he might die at any moment. He felt he had spent most of his time wandering around and hadn't been able to do much. It seemed only fair to him that he would die. His commander asked if there was anything he wanted to do if he survived, and Ronan admitted that there were many things he wanted to do. But the only thing he could think about at that moment was what it would have been like if he had gone to the academy, and she couldn't understand what he was getting at. Ronan admitted that what the giant had said to him was deeply irritating, but more important than that was his sister's wish to send him to the academy. Soon, however, he would be returning to his family. Adishan told Ronan that once the storm passed, the search party would arrive, and the corporal warned his commander that he was a lost cause and that she shouldn't insist on saying meaningless things. Suddenly, water fell into a puddle, creating a glow that surprised the two of them. They soon realized that the rain had stopped abruptly. They quickly began to shout as a creature appeared right in front of them. Ronan was terrified by the fact that the creature had 8 wings, and the problem was that it wasn't the only one. There were several of them around. Ronan just wanted to know what the hell those things were and where they had come from. Adishan couldn't believe what she was seeing and began began to think that the three giants had not been the end. Because of that, she hadn't been able to save that world. With her voice, she couldn't bring herself to think of a third time. With only one chance left, she couldn't see a way forward until Ronin began calling his great commander again and again, bringing her back to herself. He didn't understand why she had temporarily lost her sanity. He wanted her to use her telekinesis to throw him upward because he wouldn't be able to hit those creatures from where he was. Adishan didn't understand what he was trying to do, and he wondered whether she wasn't going to kill those creatures. She couldn't understand how he intended to fight in that situation, and he made it clear to his great commander that he couldn't just sit there while losing his life. Even if he died, he wanted to take at least a few of those creatures with him. Adishan was very surprised that he still hadn't given up in a situation like that, and now she saw Ronin as a great man, understanding how they had managed to reach that point. She began to believe in something. She called Ronin and placed a hand on his shoulder. He told her to stop talking because he was busy, but she simply pressed her lips against his, turning the boy into a man. He was caught completely off guard. The failure had thought he would never succeed in life. He couldn't understand what was happening, and suddenly she put something into his mouth. He was obviously inexperienced and didn't understand anything, but she simply whispered a few things into his ear that he couldn't make out. He asked her to wait a moment, but she kept saying things he didn't understand, and he began to grow nervous. Then she called him again and told him that if they ever met again, he should tell her not to do anything stupid and to become a tailor. He was utterly incredulous at that moment. She said that she had done many things, but nothing compared to that. She also said it with a smile on her face as one of the creatures began to prepare its move. Then that creature unleashed its energy toward the two of them, and suddenly everything changed. Ronin opened his eyes in shock and began calling out to his great commander. He was in a completely different place. He was simply sitting on the grass, looking around in disbelief. There were children playing in the water, and he couldn't believe he was there. He wasn't in his homeland called Nimbutnal. He had returned to the past, and that was the first day of the regression. In the end, he realized that his great commander's words had been true. He remembered the moment when she had given him her blessing. He wondered what she had put into his mouth, and now he understood clearly that she had given him a temporal return pill. That was how she herself, once a tailor, had managed to rise to the position of great commander, even though the orb allowed an individual to return a total of 4 times. She had already used 3, leaving her with only 1 chance. She was giving that chance to him, along with the power to kill the giants. She believed that Ronin himself was the key to preventing the destruction of that world. Adeshan wanted him to improve his skills, and she was glad that he shared that desire. She wanted him to go to the Filion Academy if he wished to learn, because it was a place filled with incredible people whom she believed would help Ronin. He clearly remembered Adeshan asking him not to let her do anything stupid and to remain a tailor. Soon he began to lament and started shouting beside a tree, practically begging for all of it to be a dream and for him to wake up. Everyone stared at him as he screamed like a goat because he had no idea what he could possibly do alone in the past. Then he realized that since he was in the past, he could see his sister. Filled with excitement, he ran off. As he walked, he saw the entire neighborhood, and he only needed to run a little farther. That was when he noticed what was happening nearby, and he didn't like it at all. He saw them messing with a child, leaving the boy hanging upside down. He wanted to understand why the hell those boys were bullying that other kid. In the end, he had almost forgotten all about it, and in any case, things shouldn't have been able to change since he had gone back to the past. But then he saw something that frightened him even more. That kid wasn't being held up by a rope, but by magic. To Ronin, someone that valuable was hard to find on the battlefield, so it was strange to see one like that in a rural town. Then he realized that, back then, he was certain such people had been around as well. In that place, there was a red-haired boy who was clearly terrified by what those kids were doing. He wanted to know how long they were going to keep it up, because at this rate, something bad was going to happen to that kid. The boy begged them to stop doing that to him, and in a trembling voice, he said that he really didn't have any money. He explained that his mother's medicine that month had been expensive. However, the blonde boy made it clear that he had nothing to do with that kid's problems. He didn't care about the boy's health, and soon raised his hand to strike him. He slapped the kid hard across the face, making it clear that if he wanted to be his subordinate, he needed to bring in more money. The other boys watched and found it amusing, until the blonde guy called out to the boy who was using magic to keep the kid upside down. He told him that the kid didn't know his proper place, and ordered him to lift the boy up to the top of the tree. This made the red-haired boy feel terrible, and with a shaky voice he said he couldn't do something like that, because lifting the kid that high would put him in serious danger. The blonde boy couldn't understand why he was so scared, because in his view, he wasn't holding the kid himself in any way. Then he ordered the red-haired boy, whose name was Asel, to lift the kid immediately, unless he wanted to end up the same way. Asel wondered how things had ended up like this and questioned whether learning magic had been a mistake. He had only wanted to show that he was good at something too. He began to think that he should tell the blonde guy that he couldn't do it, but the truth was that he was terribly afraid. It was really affecting him, and tears began to fall as Asel was pulled into an inner struggle. Asel asked them to stop, but Ronin appeared behind him and struck him on the head, telling Asel to shut up, because at this rate, he would end up killing the kid. The blow made Asel lose all his concentration, and the boy fell to the ground. The blonde boy boy became furious that Asel had done that and demanded to know whether Asel was going to start listening to Ronin instead of him. The poor Asel tried to explain that he hadn't done it on purpose. Ronin told the boy that he didn't need to worry about bad people like them and asked Asel to talk to him. Asel quickly recognized Ronin, and Ronin said he needed to talk to Asel about something. The blonde guy immediately started hurling insults at Ronin to get his attention, while Ronin simply ignored him and asked Asel where he had learned telekinesis. Asel explained that he had learned it from a grimoire he had bought from a traveling merchant. Ronin hadn't expected Asel to be so skilled using something learned from a cheap grimoire. He thought it was incredible, and in any case, he would find out more once he took a closer look, because using that against the giants would make things much easier. Suddenly, the blonde boy grabbed a sword, and Ronin immediately heard the sound, which caught him off guard. The blonde boy was consumed by rage, unable to understand how Ronin dared to ignore him. The blonde boy thought Ronin was acting high and mighty because he had lost to him the other day, but today he was determined to correct his manners. He rushed toward Ronin, who didn't seem very concerned. Ronin saw that it was a very large sword and wondered where the boy had gotten something like that. He also noticed that the blonde boy's stance was quite poor, but believed he was strong, and that would have to be enough for him. But obviously it wouldn't work against Ronin himself. He easily dodged the blonde boy's attack, leaving him astonished. Ronin realized that although his body was younger, nothing had truly changed. The instincts of a disciplined soldier were still within him. He still had a sense for battle. The blonde boy began to laugh, thinking Ronin was very lucky, and warned that he would make sure Ronin would never stand up again for the rest of his life. Ronin thought that he really was lucky that day, but he also felt he had been unlucky his entire life. The blonde young man thought that since things had reached that point, he wanted Ronin to kneel and beg. If he did so, the blonde would spare his life, but he made it very clear that Ronin would not get away with both arms intact. Ronin felt no fear at all, and to make things worse, the blonde revealed that after killing Ronin, he would make sure to take good care of his sister. Ronin wanted to confirm whether the blonde had really said that. The blonde then began to laugh and expressed that he had always thought about Ronin's sister. That was enough for Ronin to attack him at such speed that the movement couldn't be seen. In a single second, the young man lost his ear. He couldn't understand what had happened as he watched his ear flying through the air. The disbelief was so great that he dropped his sword. Soon after, he began screaming loudly and crouched down after losing his ear, while his companions felt awkward in that moment. Ronin then approached the young man and started insulting him. With a completely psychopathic look in his eyes, he wanted to know if the guy really wanted to lose his life. The comrades of the man who had just lost his ear tried to understand how that was possible, because Ronin had cut the man's ear off using a stick covered in blood. Ronin then called out to them, asking if they were enjoying the show. He ordered everyone there to leave and take their companion, who was nothing but a sack of manure, with them, making it clear that if they didn't do so immediately, they would end up the same way as their little friend. He then kicked the blonde man to make sure he got the message. Obviously, Ronin also demanded the money they had stolen, clarifying that it was an extra fee for ruining his mood. The men then said they would return it. Next, the scene shifts to Ronin giving a bag of money to the boy who had previously been bullied at the tree. The boy truly couldn't understand it, and asked whether Ronin was really going to give him all of that, since it was much more than what those men had stolen from him. But Ronin made it clear that it was fine, and that he only needed the sword. He told the boy not to worry about them coming back to bother him, because he was sure those men wouldn't do it again. The boy was very grateful and thanked him. Ronin didn't like wasting time, so he simply told the boy to go home. Asel, on the other hand, was standing there with flushed cheeks like a little girl, and with a trembling voice he wanted to express how sorry he was and that he truly wasn't happy about having done that. Asel knew he shouldn't have gone along with it, even though the blonde man named Hans had threatened him, but he had been very scared and ended up doing nothing about it. Soon after, he began to cry. Blaming himself entirely for what had happened, the boy thought that Asel never changed and was crying as always. He explained that ever since Hans had brought Asel there for the first time, he had looked at Asel and thought about how he was in the same situation. He believed the two of them were in the same boat, so he wanted Asel not to worry so much. And with a smile on his face, he said that Asel was not at fault. He also appreciated Asel's apology, and then he left. Ronin became a bit thoughtful as he looked at the red-haired boy who looked like a girl. In the end, Ronin didn't think Asel was a bad person, so he nudged him and asked if he remembered that there was something they needed to settle. Asel felt awkward and said that he still remembered. Ronin thought that was great and told Asel that they would see each other again in 4 days. Asel didn't understand what he meant. Ronin explained that he had some things to take care of and that they would have to meet later when the moon was visible in the night sky. But as always, Ronin never took things lightly and made it clear to the boy that if he didn't show up, he already knew what would eventually happen to him. He then drew his sword, leaving Asel quite frightened. Ronin started running and revealed that he was going to take care of his business. Asel didn't understand anything at all. Then the scene shifts to a house, where Ronin stood facing it for a while. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and wondered if flowers might be a bit too much. He remembered that she liked flowers, so he had gathered all the flowers he had seen, but his voice began to tremble, and he thought it would be better to throw the flowers away until someone opened the door, having heard someone outside. She asked if it was Ronin, and he was surprised to see that woman. During his time as a soldier, he had thought many times about what he would say when he saw her again. He didn't know whether he should apologize for disappearing without saying saying anything, or simply say that he missed her. The fact was that Ronan had thought a lot about it, but all of that was only what the soldier Ronan might have said. What he could say in that moment was something completely different. That girl was his sister, and she was excited that he had arrived early. Soon after, he confirmed that he had returned. The scene then shifts to the inside of the house, where a true feast was waiting for him. The girl was genuinely surprised and never thought she would live to see the day when her brother would simply give her flowers. Ronan's older sister was named Errol, and she was very happy. He felt a bit embarrassed, but also glad that she liked them. She asked whether he had eaten enough and if he wanted more soup. She was truly very happy with her brother's sweet gesture, and he felt quite shy as he thanked her, saying he had already eaten enough. However, he had a question and asked Errol how old she was turning that year. She promptly replied that she was turning 22, but wanted to know why he was asking. Ronan explained that he had forgotten, which offended her, and she made it very clear that it wasn't something he should forget. He then thought that if she was 22, there were 10 years left before those strange 8-winged creatures would appear again. Errol placed her hand on his forehead to see if he had a fever, but she didn't think he felt hot or anything like that. Ronan thought his sister was exactly as he remembered. She was still amazing to him, very kind, and she made him wish that moment could last forever. But in 10 years, to protect that world and his sister, he truly needed to prepare. He then told Errol that he had something to say, explaining that he was thinking about enrolling in an academy. She was a bit incredulous at first, until she burst into happiness, asking if he was serious. She asked him to repeat it, afraid she had heard wrong, and Ronan made it clear that it was exactly what he had said. Errol was surprised, since he had never listened to her when she talked about that before. She then began running around the house like a madwoman, saying she had no time to waste. Ronan didn't understand what was going on, but Errol said she had always known that day would come. He was smart, and she was sure he would do well at everything. He felt grateful for the compliments. Suddenly, she grabbed a huge cauldron and made it clear that it was the gift she had for him. He immediately leaned in to see what was inside. The cauldron was full of money, and Errol revealed that she had been secretly saving all that money to surprise her brother. If he ever changed his mind about the academy, she wanted to be able to pay everything at once. Ronan thought his sister was incredible and wondered when she had managed to save all of that. He also explained that even though he appreciated the gift, he wanted her to use it because that amount wouldn't be enough. Errol didn't understand what he meant and said that it was far more than it looked. She didn't even know which academy her brother wanted to attend, and before she could finish speaking, Ronan said that he wanted to go to the Imperial School, also known as the Frieren Academy. After hearing that, she practically collapsed. The Frieren Academy was the best educational institution in the Empire, with the finest teachers on the continent and backed by the vast funds of the imperial family. It was a place that offered the best education one could receive, with prestige great enough to be called a factory of heroes. Its status was extremely high. The great commander Adishan, the master swordsman Shalifin, and even the worst criminal, the Winter Witch, all came from that academy. Those people were also very useful during the war, so useful that Ronan could understand why the great commander had mentioned that academy to him. With such high entry standards and enormous fees, its fame was also a problem for him, but he never imagined his sister's reaction would be like that. He was walking alone through the forest, wanting to show his sister all the results he could achieve. That was when he ran into Asel there, something he hadn't expected at all. He mistakenly called him Mazel, and the boy quickly corrected his name. Asel explained that Ronan himself had said he wouldn't let him live if he didn't show up. Ronan told Asel to forget about that. He also revealed that the night would be long and that there was something he wanted to test with Asel, then dropped his backpack onto the ground. Asel wanted to understand what Ronan was suddenly talking about, but Ronan said it was nothing serious and that he just wanted Asel to use telekinesis, asking him to lift him as high as he could. Asel became a bit scared and didn't understand why this was happening out of nowhere. He didn't want to do something so dangerous, but Ronan said Asel was exaggerating and ordered him to do what he asked. He made it clear that he wouldn't die, so Asel didn't need to be afraid. Asel then prepared his magic and quickly cast it toward Ronan, who was surprised. It was much better than he had expected. Soon he was in the air, thinking that even though there wasn't much height or stability, the feeling was similar to when he had fought Ahayute. What had allowed him to fight that giant on equal footing was telekinesis. Telekinesis was a rare ability even among mages, who were already rare to begin with. That meant Asel would become the most important factor in the battle that was yet to come. Ronan thought that this beginning was going very well. However, Asel soon began to strain himself and warned Ronan that it was becoming difficult to continue. He then asked whether Ronan could come down at that moment, but Ronan wanted Asel to hold on a little longer because he wanted to check one more thing and would come down on his own. Asel grew increasingly confused until suddenly Ronan made a movement with his sword. Asel was surprised and tried to understand what the young man was attempting to do. Then, all of a sudden, Ronan dropped straight to the ground, and Asel realized that Ronan had cut through his mana. Asel tried to understand how that had just happened, and Ronan explained that it was nothing. It was just an acrobatic move he had learned after a great deal of training. Asel said he didn't understand what Ronan meant by an acrobatic acrobatic move, since it was the first time he had ever seen someone cut mana. Suddenly, he received a punch from Ronin to the head, who told Asel to keep that matter between them, because he himself didn't know what was going on either. Ronin knew that discovering what that ability was would be one of the most important things he needed to do. There had to be a reason why his sword worked on Asel. In any case, he could think about it slowly later, and there was also something else he needed to do. He picked up his backpack and told Asel that he had passed the test, then threw another backpack to him, saying that Asel needed to come with him because there was something he had to do before the moon disappeared. Asel was worried about the fact that they were heading out at such a late hour of the night. Ronin explained that this could be the first page of his own biography, declaring that it would become the greatest history book of the Empire. The scene then shifts to them walking for a long time, and Asel still didn't fully understand the matter of the Frieren Academy that Ronin had told him about. He wondered if he had heard wrong, since they were going to an academy where the entire elite of the Empire gathered. Ronin grew impatient because his friend, who looked like a girl, had heard correctly and was still asking. He asked whether Asel didn't want to go. Asel quickly explained that that wasn't the problem. He acknowledged that Ronin had talent in martial arts, so that was fine, but he himself didn't know how to do anything. He was just a cowardly and shy guy. Ronin then asked whether his companion intended to keep living like that, making it clear that Asel was wasting his talent on those people who were nothing but trash. He asked Asel whether he really wanted to keep living that kind of life. At that moment, Asel realized that the mage had two traits that were truly stupid. He was cowardly and shy, and to make matters worse, he was a crybaby who cried over anything. In the end, he was just a loser who was afraid of everything. Asel felt those words like knives stabbing into his chest, but Ronin thought it was fine, because Asel could still change from that moment onward. What had already been done couldn't be changed, and one day Asel might regret it, just as Ronin himself had regretted his past life. He asked whether Asel had changed his mind. Asel was too much of a coward, but he hadn't expected Ronin to be so concerned about someone like him. Ronin made it clear that he wouldn't force him to do anything, since it was Asel's life. Asel could go back if he wanted to. Ronin said he was busy and needed to go, but Asel asked him to wait a little and revealed that he also wanted to change. He said he was willing to go to the Frieren Academy with Ronin and wanted Ronin to teach him everything he needed to learn. Ronin immediately smiled and said that it was the first time Asel had acted in a mature way. He declared that for the first obstacle of the new Asel, they would begin right away. With a psychopathic grin, Ronin started walking, thinking that everything was going exactly as planned. The scene then shifts to a place where a bright fire was burning. Asel stared at it without understanding. He and Ronin were behind a bush, watching the scene, and Asel asked whether that was his first obstacle. Ronin made it clear that it was exactly that, and explained that it was the best opponent he had found to bring out Asel's ability. There was a lunar goblin there, and to make matters worse, it was the leader of a band, and all of them were resting. Ronin smiled and asked Asel whether he didn't think it was great, but Asel was completely shocked. Ronin, on the other hand, asked whether they could start. The lunar goblin is a type of goblin that commonly appears in the area. Most people can distinguish them from common goblins by their yellowish skin color and disfigured bodies. But in truth, the unique trait of lunar goblins is that they are fanatical about treasure. They like to ambush merchants and steal their valuables, gathering everything they've stolen in one place and holding a festival on a full moon night like that one. Asel's voice soon began to tremble when he realized that this was the reason they were there, and Ronin confirmed it, making it very clear that they were going to steal all the treasure from those lunar goblins. Asel had already heard stories about goblins that gathered treasures and held a festival in a specific location, but he wanted to know how Ronin knew about it. The swordsman simply said that he had his methods. After all, he couldn't talk about his past life to Asel. In the end, he made it clear to Asel that all he needed to do was use his telekinesis to move all the treasure into the bag Ronin had brought while the goblins were sleeping. It was a task Ronin considered very simple, but Asel didn't find it easy at all, since he could make a mistake and wake the creatures. Ronin was sure the goblins would be very angry if that happened. Asel quickly grew frightened and, with a trembling voice, said that it was too dangerous and that they should rethink it. Ronin lost his patience, since his companion was too cowardly. He then explained to Asel that for them to enter Frieren they needed two things. The first was money. They needed to obtain the insane fee the Academy charged. The second was real experience. Money was a problem, but real experience was even more important. Frieren was full of aristocrats who had received elite training since birth, so if they wanted to beat them, this was the only way. They had to gain experience by risking their own lives, and Ronin thought those creatures were perfect enemies. They would get a good amount of money and plenty of experience, and it would be much easier that way. Ronin asked if Asel had any better idea. Asel admitted that he didn't, and Ronin said that since that was the case, they would start immediately. And so, like a sneaky little thief, Asel used his magical ability, gathering all that treasure and placing it into Ronin's bag. Ronin was greedy and wanted just a bit more, but the bag was already bulging from how full it was, and the poor Asel was straining himself to the limit. Ronin was happy to see the last bag swollen with treasure. They had filled 2 bags completely, and he was glad that everything had worked out, while Asel was amazed. Ronin himself hadn't been so confident, and never imagined Asel would adapt so quickly. The red-haired boy was better than he had expected. With a devilish devilish grin, Ronan believed he had found a good servant. Since the bags were already full, he thought it would be best for them to hurry. Asel asked if he was serious, and Ronan said that they had nothing else to do there, so they should head back before something went wrong. The scene then shifts to the dark forest in the middle of the night, where a bird flew past and several figures ran in panic, furious as they chased after the bird. Suddenly, Ronan and Asel heard a shout ordering them to stop. Ronan wondered what kind of madman would be causing so much chaos at such an hour. The real problem was that one of the lunar goblins had woken up because of all the noise and looked toward the treasure, only to see that the chest was completely empty. They immediately began shouting that there were thieves around, waking all the other goblins, who started arguing about the fact that they had been robbed. Then they looked to the side and spotted Ronan and Asel. Ronan couldn't believe this was happening, and Asel grew extremely worried. Obviously, the situation was very bad. As the lunar goblins began running toward them, Asel panicked, while Ronan thought it had been too good to be true. Asel just wanted to know what they should do, begging Ronan to give up the treasure and start running. But Ronan was greedy and didn't want to lose that great opportunity. After all, it was the only way they would be able to pay for their classes. Suddenly, the lunar goblins got very close, and Asel started screaming like a little girl. Ronan looked at his sword, a long blade made of cheap steel, and with its weight and hardness, he thought it could withstand about 15 strikes. The problem was that there were around 30 lunar goblins there. Some of them leapt forward to attack Ronan, and Asel's panic only grew as he begged him to be careful. Ronan thought only about the 15 strikes and believed that would be enough. He quickly drew his sword and, in a single motion, made 3 of them lose their heads. Asel couldn't believe the grape juice he saw flying around him. Ronan kept in mind that now there were only 14 strikes left. The scene then shifts to him driving his sword into the last lunar goblin. He thought that, in the end, it hadn't been so bad, but the novice mage was devastated, thinking all of it was impossible and trying to understand what he had just witnessed. Ronan had decapitated 3 lunar goblins with a single strike, and the others who came after them were simply annihilated. The most shocking part was that Ronan had vanished for a single second, slicing all of them apart and reappearing in an instant. Asel thought Ronan had put on a true spectacle. Seeing Asel standing there motionless, Ronan asked what he was doing and whether he planned to keep spacing out. Asel then snapped back to reality and quickly apologized. But Ronan didn't want him to apologize. He just told him to gather his things because they were going back home. Soon after, the 2 young men walked through the forest. Ronan thought it had truly been exhausting and believed he would be able to travel comfortably afterward, but nothing had gone as planned. He also hadn't expected his muscles to ache just from slicing up a few goblins, though he preferred to believe that this was happening because he was still growing. He moved his arm a little, trying to get more comfortable, thinking that when he got back, he would need to do some physical training. Asel asked Ronan what that shout they had heard earlier was about, but the swordsman had no idea. Suddenly, they heard another shout, ordering someone to stop. They were startled, but Ronan wondered why someone would be shouting so loudly in the middle of the night. He thought those guys had better pray hard, because he was going to make them pay for making his and his companions' lives difficult. However, there was a man behind them preparing an arrow to fire in their direction. The arrow was released quickly, and Asel sensed something different and immediately turned around. Ronan cursed under his breath and managed to catch the arrow before it could hit Asel. He wanted to know what the hell was going on, and Asel stood there in shock, seeing an arrow in Ronan's hand. He wondered how an arrow could have appeared so suddenly. Ronan started to think that the forest was cursed or full of lunatics. Then 2 men appeared, and Ronan couldn't believe it was those 2. The 2 archers were confused as well, unable to understand how there were 2 humans there. To make matters worse for them, both of those humans were children, which deeply irritated Ronan. Asel didn't understand what was happening. The 2 archers apologized and called them kids again. Ronan didn't like that at all. One of them explained that they had heard something making noise in the distance and thought it was a monster. But when they saw the bag full of treasure, they started thinking of a way to take possession of the loot the boys had stolen from the lunar goblins. They tried to pretend they were there to help, asking if they were hurt. However, with all the life experience Ronan had from before, he could see that those 2 couldn't hide their intentions in their eyes. The 2 men grew confused when Ronan told them to stop the act and answer properly. He released a very dark aura and demanded to know who they were, which shocked them. One of them continued acting friendly and admitted he had forgotten to introduce himself. He apologized, then suddenly pulled out a knife and, with a psychopathic grin, revealed that he was a Caliboro. Ronan immediately recognized the name. In a flash, he grabbed one of the Caliboro by the wrist, asking whether he was one of that trash. The other man grew indignant and rushed toward Ronan. At that moment, Asel finally seemed to man up and quickly tried to help Ronan. He used his telekinesis, unwilling to let his companion face such danger alone. The blonde man couldn't understand what was happening. As he couldn't move, Ronan was surprised by Asel and thought he had done very well. With a swift kick, He disarmed the man, knocking the knife out of his hand, then quickly grabbed the blade himself. The man was shocked by what he had just seen, but before he could ask Ronin who he was completely sliced apart and collapsed to the ground. Asel was horrified by the sight. He asked Ronin if the man was dead. Ronin thought that was obvious and made it clear that he wouldn't let someone who had tried to kill him live. He asked whether Asel hadn't heard what one of them had said. They were Caliboro. Asel grew very frightened. The group known as Caliboro dealt in dark activities such as illegal hunting, kidnapping, and human trafficking. They committed all kinds of crimes and were one of the most malicious groups in the Empire. Ronin then finished off the other man as well. He told his companion that if it hadn't been for him, Asel would have ended up losing his organs and being secretly burned alive that very day. Even so, Asel still found all of this deeply troubling. Ronin believed that knowing who those men were and letting them live would have been an incredibly stupid crime. They were doing society a favor. Nearby, there was a sack that suddenly opened. Before Ronin could do anything, the sack began jumping violently. He had no idea what was going on. Thinking it might be an animal, Ronin quickly went to check, and when they opened the sack, a bird flew out, taking them both by surprise. Ronin wondered what that bird was, thinking it looked like a blue chicken. He also couldn't understand why the bird was blue. Asel was amazed, explaining that it was the first time he had ever seen a blue bird. Ronin said it was also his first time, but he noticed that the bird had shackles on its legs. He recognized them as Caliboro restraints. Caliboro shackles disrupted the prisoner's mana and restricted their movements. Ronin thought they only used those in rare cases or when capturing fantastic creatures. In this way, he believed that the blue bird was a fantastical creature, and the blue bird simply began to speak, clearly happy because it had finally connected, and a magical rune appeared. The two of them became extremely frightened, especially Asel, who already wanted to hug Ronin, showing just how strange of a guy he was. Ronin then explained to Asel that it was not what he was thinking. This was communication magic, and seeing how the bird was able to speak with them as soon as it came out of the sack, Ronin believed there was a possibility that the bag was capable of blocking mana. Ronin then wanted to know if he was speaking with the owner of the blue bird, and the individual confirmed it. He introduced himself as Frieren and informed them that he was researching rare beasts at the institution. He also explained that the bird was the guardian of Marpes. No matter how many times he had tried to communicate with it, it had never worked, and he had even considered filing a missing person report. But now he was truly relieved. He apologized and asked who they were, and Ronin informed him that they were merely travelers. Ronin explained that they had ended up fighting some thieves who had kidnapped the bird, and in the end, he thought the memories were far too bloody to explain. Basically, he wanted Frieren to understand that they had saved the bird. Frieren was surprised to learn that the blue bird had been kidnapped by thieves, and at that point, he told Ronin that he was in his debt. Frieren did not know how to repay such a favor. Asel thought he did not need to do anything in return, but he also wanted to know how they could return the bird to Frieren, since the blue bird seemed exhausted from being chained. Ronin asked whether, if he removed the shackles, the bird would be able to fly, and Frieren believed so. He also explained that dream birds had a strong sense of direction, and that, if it were freed, it might be able to return on its own. Ronin quickly drew his sword and struck toward the bird, causing a huge fright. However, he had simply hit the shackles, which shattered into several pieces almost instantly. Ronin wanted the bird to return to its owner and not leave Frieren worried. The blue bird was truly grateful to Ronin for doing that, and suddenly it turned its back to him, leaving Ronin confused. As the bird was now facing away from him with its rear toward him, he wanted to understand what that meant, especially since the bird was even wiggling. Frieren explained that the bird wanted him to pull out a feather, as that way they would be able to meet again in the future. It would basically function like a compass to its main body, and so Ronin quickly removed a feather. Frieren then told Ronin that if he ever came to the institution, he should visit both him and the bluebird, whose name was Marpes. He made it very clear that he would certainly repay his debt. The bluebird then began to fly, but its speed was absurd, leaving Ronin very surprised. Asel wanted to know what Ronin was holding, and Ronin realized at that moment, after his companion asked, that it was tingling, and suddenly he became startled, trying to understand what exactly was in front of them. A few days later, the scene shifts to a place with several horses and wagons. Some people were loading crates onto the wagons. An old man examined the value of the jewel as well as the craftsmanship, revealing that it was an incredible object, and he offered 20 gold coins for it. That old man was the owner of the Carabel merchants, and his name was Duan Carabel. He never imagined that a customer would appear and present items of such great value, so Duan believed it was a lucky day and quickly saw Ronin as a valuable client. Ronin was happy to have finally found someone who understood, while Asel kept holding onto his arm like a frightened little girl. Ronin remembered very well that all the other merchants merchants were scammers, and he was already fed up with it. But in the end, it was worth it, as he had finally found an honest merchant. Duan felt honored to hear that, and asked if Ronin had anything else he could examine. Ronin quickly took an item out of his pocket and showed it to him, revealing that he did not want to sell it, but was curious to know what it was. Duan became intrigued as he looked at the item. Ronin remembered clearly that the blue bird had left it behind that night. It was literally an egg. At first, Ronin thought the blue bird had pooped in his hand, but that was not the case. He clearly remembered thinking that the bird had simply repaid his kindness with a very foul gift. But that was not it. He believed the blue bird had given him the egg so that he could protect it. In the end, he was so annoyed that he tested it by throwing the egg against a rock. But what happened was that the rock was completely affected by the egg, which managed to create a huge hole where it struck. And it was only in that way that he ended up discovering it was an excellent item. At the moment Ronin did that, both he and Asel were amazed. The scene then shifts to Duan, who could not tell whether it was a bird's egg. Ronin, on the other hand, was aware that it was the product of a fantastical creature, and thus could be a very valuable treasure. Duan carefully examined the color and texture, and Ronin began to get excited. However, Duan started to think it was horse droppings, obviously trying to deceive Ronin, who was left in disbelief. Ronin tried to explain to Duan that it was not what he was thinking, but in the end, the old man merely expressed that he did not know what it was. It was an unusual object to Duan, so he believed Ronin should take it somewhere special to be appraised. In the end, Ronin sighed and swallowed his frustration, since he was curious and had no intention of selling it anyway. Ronin then asked whether the old man Duan sold books about Filion, and Duan asked if he was talking about the academy. Ronin confirmed and explained that they were planning to take the entrance exam for Filion, but they did not know much about it, which Duan thought was great. He informed the two of them that his daughter would also be taking the entrance exam, and Duan thought his daughter could help them. However, he was not sure where she might be until the girl arrived at the place and asked what was going on. She wanted to know who the two young men talking to her father were. Duan then pointed her out, saying she was his only daughter. She was a blonde girl with green eyes, and she was very beautiful. The girl's name was Maria. Ronin was surprised to see that she was Maria, and her father wanted her to greet the two of them, as they were important people who had just concluded a deal. She was surprised to hear that from her father, as she thought the boys could not possibly be big buyers. Duan became furious at the sharp tongue his daughter had and wanted her to have better manners. He then apologized to the two of them, while Asel tried to calm the old man, though Asel was not sure whether Ronin would be fine with it. However, Ronin walked up to Maria and asked if she really was Maria. Naturally, she did not understand what he meant by that. Ronin then asked if she was Maria with the surname Sen, and she confirmed it, but at the same time wanted to know how he knew that. Ronin found it strange because the girl truly resembled her, yet there was an issue involving the person he knew, and he soon vaguely remembered that person. Ronin then decided to ask her another question, but he was completely insane for doing so, asking such a thing the very moment he had just met her. He wanted to know if she had a stalk down there. He whispered it into her ear, and her eyes went wide. Maria simply could not believe the stupidity she had just heard. To make matters worse, Ronin thought that no matter how much he looked, he believed Maria did not have one, which left the young woman outraged. He then asked whether the old man had another child she did not know about, and Maria quickly slapped him across the face, as that was exactly what he deserved, telling him to shut his mouth because she thought he was insane. Ronin did not understand anything at first, but the slap felt strangely familiar to him, making him think that she really was who he thought she was, the Count Maria Sen Enro. At that moment, a terrible confusion took shape. Maria Sen had once been Ronin's comrade in arms in a place called Armarlin, where Maria was in charge of supplies. With an excellent work ethic and an easygoing personality, he made friends with everyone, and Ronin truly admired Maria. However, whenever they talked about stalks, Maria became quite irritated and had the strange habit of slapping others. Ronin had always been curious about the reason for this and wanted to ask him about it if they ever met again. But that opportunity never came, as Maria had died before that. Ronin never expected to find his answer there. He realized that Count Maria Sen was actually a woman. Seeing him laugh, Maria wanted to know whether the slap she had given him was not enough, and since that was the case, she was willing to hit him again. However, Ronin grew irritated and punched her on the head, telling her to stop, leaving her with a huge bump thanks to the punch. He made it very clear that she should not get full of herself, as he had allowed her to hit him the first time. Ronin explained that he had let her hit him earlier because he had made a mistake, and that only made Maria willing to hit him several more times, since she thought he was completely crazy. She quickly grabbed him by the hair, while he grabbed her face, and she demanded to know what the hell he was going to do, making it clear that Ronin was a dead man. Asel and Duan could only watch the fight, which looked like a quarrel between husband and wife. Soon, the two of them began rolling on the ground, and Asel and the old man decided to stop the fight. After some time, the scene shifts again. Asel was in disbelief, trying to understand what had happened between the two of them. because they had been trying to kill each other just moments ago, and now they were calmly talking while examining the sword until they noticed how surprised Asel was. Ronan was showing her his weapons. There were 3 swords and a magic staff. She wanted to understand why he carried 3 swords, since she thought that would make them harder to transport. Ronan explained that he used his swords in a rather destructive way, so it was all a precaution. He then asked what Maria thought of that sword. She did not think it was a bad sword, but the black iron sword was much better. Black iron was a very hard material, and therefore highly sought after by renowned knights. She showed him a sword and said that, although she did not know how rough he was with his weapons, she believed that sword would not break. The black iron sword had been one of her favorites in her past life. She also thought the magic staff had an excellent magic stone, and she looked at Asel, wanting to know if he was the mage, even calling him a cutie. Asel confirmed it with great enthusiasm. Maria then wanted to know what kind of magic he used, and Asel revealed that it was telekinesis. Maria was shocked to learn his technique and immediately told him he was amazing, saying that if he could use it properly, he might even earn a scholarship at Frieren Academy. Maria then wanted to know what technique Ronan planned to use, but he did not know. She explained that to enter the academy, there was a practical exam in which he needed to impress the professors and demonstrate his techniques. She also said that the theoretical exam was very difficult, but not as hard as the practical one, and that anyone who passed the practical exam had a very high chance of passing overall. He needed to prove himself worthy to enter. Ronan thought that a swordsman only needed good fencing skills. He asked what people usually demonstrated in the exam, and Maria explained that most nobles showed their family's secret techniques, while most martial artists and common applicants showed their mana-based combat techniques. That information surprised him. He asked whether children who used swords at that age could use mana even if they were not mages. Maria was confused because there was no way to be a Frieren student without knowing that using mana was literally mandatory. One had to feel their mana unconsciously and use it in combat. That was truly basic knowledge for them. She saw Ronan staring blankly and wanted to understand why. She then grew frustrated, believing he could not feel his own mana. Ronan asked whether it was similar to aura, which completely shocked her. Her frustration grew, as she could not believe that someone like him wanted to try to enter Frieren Academy. She made it very clear that not even the craziest person could say that aura and mana were similar things. Ronan somehow felt she was exaggerating, but Maria did not accept that and immediately stood up, telling him to follow her. She asked him to bring his swords, since she had left hers at the blacksmith. Ronan did not understand why she was so confident, because he was genuinely worried she might damage his swords, but she told him not to worry. Everything would be over before any breakage happened, and if something did break, she promised she would pay triple for it. He still did not look very pleased, but in the end, she just wanted him to stop grumbling and follow her, informing him that she would give him special training. Mana was the root of nature's power and, like air, a natural energy that existed everywhere in the world. However, that did not mean everyone could use mana. To use mana, an individual had to see and feel their own mana, and that was not all. They also had to be able to use mana senses. Reaching that stage depended on training, innate talent, and other factors, but it normally took about a year of training for someone to begin sensing it. Frieren applicants had already surpassed that stage, and after learning their own mana techniques, they went to the academy. That was why Maria wanted him to forget about sensing for now. He did not even know the difference between mana and aura, yet he still wanted to go to Frieren Academy, which made no sense to her. Ronan held one sword while she held 2, though she admitted that from a certain perspective, aura could be considered a type of mana. But the difference between them was like heaven and earth. Ronan asked if it was really that different. Maria explained that there were individuals with great talent who trained for at least 10 years. Yet even with such a surreal amount of effort, they still could not obtain that power. And that was aura. She wanted to know if he understood at least a little, and somehow he did. Ronan remembered encountering such people on the battlefield from time to time. They acted arrogant for being aura users, and all wielded a similar power. He also remembered how annoying those guys were, though he had unexpectedly discovered just how incredible that power was. Still, in the end, a person could die if they were cut. Maria quickly grew tired of all the explanations and wanted to start right away. She believed he would learn much faster by using his body rather than his head. Ronan, however, thought she was not that impressive since she was still very young, but then she moved extremely fast, leaving him completely surprised. He quickly tried to block her attack, finding everything about it astonishing, and swiftly escaped her pressure. She was able to exert tremendous power despite being so young, and she also wielded 2 swords. Ronan still had not fully seen it, but he wanted to know whether that was a fighting style that used mana. At that moment, Maria only wanted to know what was wrong with that man. She planned to end it in a single blow and show him the power of mana so that he would give up on the test. She thought it would be better that way than for him to be humiliated in the testing grounds. Instead, she was the one being pressured by him, and she she could not imagine that someone who could not use mana could be so skilled. She thought it was impossible. Ronan wanted to know what she was thinking, and he quickly pressed her again and prepared an attack, making it clear that she should dodge rather than block. Maria was confused at that moment, but she thought quickly and managed to evade his strike. The dodge was so violent that she had to drive her sword into the ground to stop herself. She knew she had been in great danger just then. She realized that the young man was not normal, and Ronan thought she was not a normal girl either. He told her that setting mana aside, her swordsmanship was excellent, but her swing was a bit rusty. With that, he sheathed his sword and told her she should fix that, as it would greatly improve her skills. Maria wanted to know where he was going. She grew irritated and said that he had not won just because of that. Ronan did not care and only wanted her to keep her word, since she had said she would pay triple, and she had indeed broken his sword. She had not noticed and widened her eyes when she heard that. She asked when she had done that, and he simply told her to prepare the swords. Asel, being his adorable self, tapped her on the shoulder to get her attention and said that she had done a good job. In the end, Asel did not understand much of what was going on, and Ronan told him to hurry up because he was tired. In the end, Maria only wanted to understand who those two really were. The scene then shifts to the next day. Ronan said he was there to collect his money, but he truly wanted to understand what all of that was, as there were many books. Maria explained that they were theory books for Philion's written exam, as well as summaries she had made herself. She made it clear that he needed all of it, since there was only 1 month left until the exam, though she said it with a certain pleasure, thinking he would lose. Ronan wanted to understand why she was going so far, and in the end, he believed she was planning to sabotage him. However, she revealed that he did not need to worry, because she genuinely liked both him and Asel. That was why she was giving them those materials, because she wanted them to pass. She said it was a gift, so everything was free. Since it was free, Ronan decided to take it. Maria also said she would have liked to teach him personally, but due to her duties, she had to leave at that moment. She asked the two of them to study hard, because she would collect her due from them someday. Ronan made it clear that the same applied to her. Soon after, she was already atop the wagon saying goodbye and telling them they would meet again in the capital on the day of the exam. At that moment, Ronan grew thoughtful. He believed he needed to train that weak body and also needed to study. Studying was something he was not very good at, but he did not think it felt bad either. After returning home, Ronan's life went on as usual, but something had begun to change. He ate with Errol, who was quite surprised and said it was good to see him eating so much. Things had changed to the point that his stomach was almost bursting after every meal. He burned off all those calories by hunting monsters around the village, increasing his stamina and adaptability. He trained by fighting them, and once he had taken down all the monsters, he felt a great sense of relief and thought he could end it there for the day. He kept doing this until there were no monsters left around the village. Above all that, he studied, something unimaginable for a soldier like him. He grew irritated while studying and had to memorize northern dining etiquette. Even without knowing how everything would turn out, Ronan gave it his all. After the month passed, the climax of the story finally arrived. He was in Valon, the central city. At its heart stood the Empire's finest educational institution, better known as the White Tower. Asel stood there with his mouth open, staring at Philion Academy. He thought it was a very beautiful place, but Ronan scolded him for standing in the middle of the street, telling him to stop acting like a country bumpkin and get inside, or they would be late for the exam. Asel looked at Ronan differently and wanted to know what had happened to him. Asel explained that he was a bit surprised. After just 1 month, Ronan had grown bigger. Ronan immediately snapped at the poor guy, telling him to stop talking nonsense and hurry to the exam. As Ronan began walking, he thought that since he was in that place, he might encounter the so-called Sword Saint, a man named Schlieffen, one of the descendants of the Grancia, a prestigious family of swordsmen. He was said to be a genius, regarded as the strongest in the Empire. Ronan believed that Schlieffen was probably around the same age as him, and that he would meet that guy during the exam. In any case, Ronan did not care much about it. Asel then asked whether Ronan still had that thing, and Ronan did not understand what Asel was getting at. Asel reminded Ronan about the bluebird's feather, the one from the bird they had saved back then, which was supposed to lead him to its owner. Ronan had already forgotten about that, but he revealed that he had placed the feather in his backpack before leaving. He vaguely remembered the old man saying that he lived in the capital. Ronan planned to visit him after the test. However, the bluebird's feather suddenly pointed toward the highest floor. The scene then shifts to the top floor, where Frieren was lamenting how difficult things were. He was not used to being a professor and wondered whether he should return to being a researcher. He sought the bluebird's advice, and Marpez somehow communicated with him, receiving a gentle pat in return. Frieren believed that in some way he needed to keep going so that he could repay the hero who had saved the bluebird's life. Frieren Ganashire, a professor of zoology at Philion, was known for being a rather foolish man. Soon, he received a warning from the little bird and decided to open the window to let some air circulate, as the bird thought the hero might visit them that very day, and it would be troublesome if the air was not flowing. Suddenly, they heard a noise, and Frieren realized that Ronan was standing at the window, looking perfectly calm. Frieren was badly startled, while Ronan took it naturally and asked whether Frieren was, in fact, the bird's owner. Varen, quite frightened and trembling, held his little blue bird tightly, trying to give it as much reassurance as possible. He wanted to know who the man at his window was and how he had even gotten there, since that was one of the highest floors. Ronan himself thought he might fall, as he had been startled by Varen's scream. Asel pointed out that this was exactly why he had told them to use the stairs. Varen wanted to know if they were there to take Marpez, until he noticed that Ronan was holding a feather in his hand and became surprised. He soon realized that the two of them were the heroes who had blessed his little blue bird. He couldn't believe that he had behaved so poorly in front of his heroes. After everyone calmed down, they sat on the sofa and Varen apologized for his behavior. Ronan, however, didn't like unnecessary fuss and said it was fine and there was no need for apologies. He even thought Asel should be blamed for it, since he was the one who had climbed through the window. Asel was immediately confused, pointing out that Ronan had been the one who told him to use telekinesis because he found stairs irritating. Before he could finish, Ronan grabbed his cheek and told him to be quiet. What mattered most to Ronan at that moment was how unexpected everything was. He was looking at a lion in front of him, a rare type of beast man, and the fact that he was the owner of that bird and also a professor at Philion was equally surprising. Varen admitted that he was surprised as well, since he hadn't imagined his heroes would be applicants. He was even a little sad, because if he had known, he would have prepared a recommendation for them. But the exam was that very day, and he hoped the two of them wouldn't fail. Ronan soon realized this, and since he was already there, wanted to ask a question. He was certain that the lion knew they didn't have much time, so he showed what the little bird had left behind and asked what it was. Varen saw that Marpez had left behind a dreambird egg and was deeply shocked that his bird had laid an egg. Ronan didn't understand and asked if it was really that impressive for a bird to lay an egg. Varen explained that it wasn't just any bird. Marpez was a dream bird. The most surprising part was that Varen had no idea what would hatch from that egg. Ronan wanted to understand where the lion was going with this. If it was a bird egg, Ronan reasoned, then a bird would come out of it. But Varen explained that a dream bird was completely different. Depending on the surrounding environment, a dream bird absorbs the unique mana there and lays an egg accordingly. In an area filled with lava, a flame-covered phoenix would emerge. In a monster nest, a monster would be born, and so on. There were even circumstances in which what emerged wouldn't take the form of a bird at all. By analyzing the mana coming from the egg, it wasn't impossible to predict what would appear. However, Varen could see that the egg contained countless kinds of mana and looked like molten metal, as if it had truly been forged. Even so, it was difficult to say for certain what that egg was. Ronan thought the lion was putting too much meaning into an egg, so he asked where Marpez had gone to lay such an egg. The little blue bird seemed confused, and Ronan had never seen such a shameless bird. Varen then asked the swordsman for a favor, and wanted to know if he would mind taking care of the egg. Ronan said he didn't mind. Still, he asked if that was really okay for the lion, since the egg seemed extremely precious. Varen knew it was indeed very precious, because a dream bird only lays one egg in its entire life. The fact that it had laid that egg in front of his heroes made Varen believe that Marpez had sensed something special. He simply wanted to respect his friend, with whom he had spent so much time. For that reason, he wanted to entrust the egg to Ronan. Ronan was fine with it, as he was curious to see what would hatch from the egg. In the end, Ronan said it was almost time, and that they had finished clearing up their doubts. However, Varen had more to say. He stood up and said he had been thinking about how to reward Ronan, and had come up with something great. He handed Ronan a scroll and explained that it would help him hatch the egg. Naturally, neither of them knew what it was. The scene then shifted to some time later, in the practical test hall, the main building of Galelian Castle, at the waiting area for martial artists, where many people stood with their swords. A man announced that the exam of Candidate 111 had ended. He then called Candidate 112 to take the exam. Everyone was obviously nervous, and Ronan realized he would be next, though he was irritated because the organization of the place was making him wait too long. Maria was beside him, and explained that it was like this in every test. Ronan asked why she was dressed that way, and whether it wasn't uncomfortable. Maria told him she had taken extra care with her appearance. Philion Academy was a private academy full of nobles. They could become valuable clients later on, so she thought it was important to make a good impression. Ronan thought she was trying too hard. Maria said it would have been nice if the cutie were there, which was a pity for her. She was referring to Asel. Ronan thought there was nothing to be done since the mage's test was held elsewhere. He would just be glad if Asel wasn't crying alone. Soon they announced that Candidate 112's exam had ended, and the candidate's expression didn't look good. Ronan was then called in. He was Candidate 113. He quickly stood up, and Maria told him not to be nervous and to do his best, because if he failed that exam, she wouldn't let him off easily. Ronan was grateful for her support, and said he would be back soon. He then entered the hall and saw all those people. These were the professors of Philion, and Ronan thought they all looked impressive. Among them, however, there was an old man in the center, the Archmage Krava Kratir, the headmaster of the academy. Ronan also noticed a woman who struck him as extraordinary. Rarely had he felt such vigor even in his past life. She was the fencing instructor, also known as the Great Sword Saint, and her name was Nabaros. He introduced himself to all the professors. The headmaster made it clear that it was a pleasure to meet him and explained that Ronan would be facing a magical dummy. They wanted to see what Ronan could demonstrate in terms of technique. Ronan said it was nothing special, just a technique he called a quick cut. He believed it would be enough for a dummy, and everyone was confused as to why he would use a simple cut without mana. The professor with the long blonde beard remarked that there was always someone who judged the appearance of the magical dummy and said things like that. Another professor with white hair argued that they shouldn't judge a candidate so quickly, as he might be from a distant town and unfamiliar with the rules. Despite its appearance, the magical dummy had defensive capabilities that could withstand aura and regenerated quickly. It was built with extremely precise magical engineering. Even the great genius Schlieffen had barely managed to leave a scratch on it. This made them curious to see what Ronan would do. The headmaster watched the professors being rather harsh toward the candidate, yet he believed Ronan might prove them wrong. Suddenly his eyes widened at what he was seeing. He couldn't understand how Ronan could possess such vigor at such a young age. Ronan's movement was extremely fast, and he ended up cutting the magical dummy. Nabaros's eyes widened, and Ronan quickly sheathed his sword, saying that was all. At once, two professors began to scoff at him and asked whether the headmaster didn't agree with them. Krava, however, stood there with his mouth agape, while Professor Nabarose slammed her foot onto the table, startling the blonde-bearded professor. She strode toward Ronan with a demonic look and pointed her sword at his neck. Ronan said she had scared him, but Nabaros wanted to know who he was and who had taught him that swordsmanship. Ronan didn't quite understand her question, so Nabaros changed it, asking whether he had seen her movements. He confirmed that he had, and declared that her movements were incredible. To Ronan, in that instant, it should have been difficult even for her to draw her sword, but she had not only drawn it, she had also swung it 3 times. Nabaros confirmed everything he had said. It was exactly as he had shown. That, she said, was the so-called arrogant cut. Ronan's eyes widened at that moment. Nabaros then asked whether he thought she wouldn't recognize his swordsmanship. She knew he had deliberately slowed down the final cut in case they didn't see it, as if he were underestimating all the professors. She thought he was extremely arrogant and asked whether Ronan had forgotten where he was. Headmaster Krava Kratir merely observed, while the theoretical professors truly understood nothing. They simply hadn't been able to see the boy's movement. At that moment, Ronan believed there had been a misunderstanding. He had only held back because he thought the sword wouldn't withstand the final cut. Judging by her mood, Ronan believed Professor Nabaros wouldn't believe him. She quickly pulled her sword away from his neck, turned her back to him, and said she would remember him. Ronan couldn't believe that was all. Nabaros then declared that she would personally see to teaching him. Only then did he realize it wasn't over. She returned to her seat, and the headmaster pondered her words. He believed that Professor Nabaros wanted the student as her disciple. Perhaps then, he would need to pay close attention. Krava Kratir told Ronan that he had done a good job and that they would conclude his test with a simple question, one without a definitive answer. The headmaster asked what Ronan had come to learn at the academy. The swordsman replied that, without a doubt, what he wanted to learn was how to have no regrets. That was why he had come to the academy. The headmaster understood and asked him to leave. Director Krava kept thinking about the boy's desire to live without regrets. He found it rather troubling and wondered how he was supposed to teach something like that to Ronan. The professor with the long beard, meanwhile, was completely confused. First, it had been Professor Nabaros, and now even the headmaster. He wanted to understand what Ronan had shown to make them react that way, and whether it really had been such an incredible trick. Krava thought calling it a trick was a poor way to put it. What it truly was could only be called talent. At that moment, the dummy's head began to fall. The 2 theoretical professors were deeply shocked. The dummy's head had simply dropped off. Meanwhile, Ronan was outside, thinking about the woman with the sword. He wondered whether even his past self would have been able to secure a victory. He had believed he had faced plenty of difficulties, but now he could see that he still had a long road ahead. That realization left him somewhat excited, and he felt he had done the right thing by coming to the academy. He wanted the commander to know about it, because if he stayed there, he was certain he would learn a great deal. Now all that remained was the written test. He had been memorizing things for a month, and believed it would be easy. The scene then shifted to him completely frustrated. The test was not easy at all. He was so traumatized that his voice trembled as he explained to Estelle and Maria that he was utterly screwed at that moment, until he realized that his entire life had always been like this. Maria never would have imagined that he had failed to answer half of the test. She couldn't understand why, since he had claimed to have looked over the material she had left in a bag. Estelle explained to the blonde girl what had happened. Ronan had simply taken out what he needed to study and moved the bag, and after becoming extremely focused, he completely forgot about it. Estelle quickly began to blame himself, thinking none of this would have happened if he had warned him. Maria couldn't believe idiots like Ronan actually existed. Maria then asked if Ronan had been like that ever since the test ended. She also wanted to know when the results would be released, and she quickly pulled him up, trying to lift his spirits, reminding him that the practical exam carried more weight. With his skills, she was certain certain he would get into the academy. Just then, a strong light appeared, and the boy became startled and shouted for everyone to look. A kind of list quickly appeared. Asel wondered if it was the list of those who had passed, and Maria thought it had come faster than expected. Asel saw that he had been accepted into the magic department, while Maria was in the martial arts department. The two of them began to cheer. They had made it into Philion Academy. Maria also showed Asel that he had placed first in the theoretical exam, and Asel couldn't believe it. Maria was overjoyed and thought he was amazing, calling him cutie again. Asel said it was just luck. Maria then wanted to know Ronan's ranking, but Ronan was in a miserable state and already knew the answer. He simply wasn't there. Someone like him couldn't go to the academy. Maria was shocked that Ronan hadn't made it, and Asel also thought it was impossible. Maria quickly grew irritated and tried to snap Ronan out of it, telling him to stop joking, because there was no way something like that could happen. Ronan revealed that he was serious and that he had read all the names. Then suddenly, something like a meteor fell near them, causing a massive explosion. Ronan didn't understand why another beam of light appeared out of nowhere, and Maria explained that it was the final announcement of the entrance exams meant for the chosen candidates of each department. A glorious phoenix appeared, and suddenly it unleashed a flame toward Ronan, who didn't understand anything. An explosion followed as he was struck by the phoenix, and that was how it was revealed that Ronan had been chosen by the martial arts department. He had ranked first in the practical exam, but his theoretical score was simply too low. The three of them were completely confused, and then Maria and Asel hugged Ronan, happy about his achievement. For someone who had done so poorly in theory, Ronan had still been chosen by the department. Maria already knew Ronan was a genius, and that he would pass, and he wore a huge smile on his face. Then he realized something. This meant that Schlieffen had lost to him. Given Schlieffen's personality, Ronan thought there was no way that man would stay quiet about it. In the end, Ronan found it a little strange, and suddenly Schlieffen appeared, radiating negative energy. He wanted to see the one who had placed first in the practical exam. Hearing Schlieffen behind him, Ronan couldn't believe that this was how they would end up meeting again this time. Schlieffen was known as the Sword Saint. People were surprised to see Schlieffen there. They never imagined they would see a rising star of the Empire in that place. Maria thought the Sword Saint wanted to see Ronan. Asel felt that Schlieffen's aura was terrifying, and Ronan thought it was going to be a huge pain. In the end, Schlieffen was still the same. He couldn't acknowledge anyone as having swordsmanship superior to his own, and he possessed an overwhelming, domineering spirit. Ronan wanted to avoid that situation, so he quickly pretended to be clueless, acting as if he had no idea how he had ended up in first place or what was even going on. Schlieffen stared at him with an envious look, trying to understand why Ronan was lying. Ronan kept pretending he didn't understand what the Sword Saint was talking about and asked if he had any proof, hoping Schlieffen would stop picking a fight and go on his way. Soon, Schlieffen grabbed his sword and said he would show proof. He made a move, and Ronan quickly blocked the attack. However, he did so in shock, and his two friends were equally surprised by that movement. Schlieffen asked if that was enough, and declared that if Ronan hadn't truly been in first place, he wouldn't have been able to react to a move like that. Everyone present believed the two were about to start fighting. Schlieffen wanted Ronan to show the skills that had defeated him. Ronan thought the Sword Saint was crazy, but since that was what he wanted, Ronan had no problem showing him. He quickly struck Schlieffen's sword, making it clear that he would demonstrate, and thus the fight began. Ronan's movement was so fast that Schlieffen was caught off guard and barely managed to block at the last second. Ronan felt he had already done more than enough and asked if Schlieffen was satisfied yet. However, Schlieffen looked at the arm holding his sword and saw it trembling violently. He soon admitted that it made sense for Ronan to have such a high score, since he had good technique. Still, as Schlieffen expected, he closed in on Ronan at high speed and made it clear that it wasn't enough to defeat him. Ronan promptly called him a maniac and told the Sword Saint to relax, saying he was taking things far too seriously. Schlieffen, however, only wanted Ronan to reveal everything he was hiding. With a completely demonic expression, Schlieffen still refused to accept it, and they continued to clash, their swords colliding again and again. Ronan, who thought the Sword Saint was an idiot, believed the man was actually trying to kill him. That was exactly why he had wanted to avoid Schlieffen in the first place. If things continued at that pace, Schlieffen would end up using his aura, which would be a huge problem. With a single slash, Schlieffen could create a storm, the fearsome aura known as the Tempest Sword. Ronan couldn't handle that, so Ronan suddenly turned his back on him. Schlieffen couldn't understand what his opponent was doing, as he saw no honor in it. At that moment, Ronan grabbed Asel by the shoulder. Schlieffen made it clear he wasn't going to lose that fight. Ronan then shoved his companion in front of him, and Asel didn't understand why Ronan was choosing him for that. Schlieffen also thought Asel was a girl, so he began to think Ronan was even more cowardly for using a girl as a human shield. Because of that, he no longer saw Ronan as a knight. That was when Asel became completely frustrated, and with a trembling voice explained to everyone that he was actually a man. Just as Ronan had predicted, Schlieffen's behavior remained the same. He would keep clinging to chivalry even on the brink of death. In an instant, Ronan struck Schlieffen. The blow hit him hard, right in the face. Schlieffen dropped to one knee, supporting himself with his sword. At that moment, Ronan signaled Maria and Asel to run. Schlieffen didn't understand what was happening. Seeing the three of them running away, he asked them to wait for a moment. Soon, a bald man arrived at the scene, demanding to know what the hell was going on. His eyes widened when he saw Schlieffen in that state, and he asked the swordsman if he was all right, wanting to know who had dared to do this to him. As members of the guard, they said they would go after the culprit, treating Schlieffen as if he were a noble. Schlieffen, however, declared that it wasn't necessary, since at that moment he wasn't a son of the ducal family, but merely an applicant with common status. Schlieffen told the guards they didn't need to worry. It had just been a fair fight, and he would handle it himself. Then he realized something that shocked him. His sword had cracked. He couldn't understand it, since it was a high-grade mithril sword. He had thought Ronan's abilities were nothing special, but in truth, Ronan had accomplished all that with a far inferior blade. Schlieffen admitted to himself that this was extremely interesting, and that he would remember Ronan's name. The scene then shifts to the next day, outside the capital, in a forest called Shimo. Ronan was walking through the forest with a map in his hand, but he was lost. Poor Asel was accompanying him, still worried about whether they could really do this, while Ronan couldn't understand what he was getting at. Asel was referring to the fight Ronan had had the previous day against the Sword Saint. He had heard that Schlieffen was the heir of a ducal family, second in influence only to the imperial family. To make matters worse, Ronan had broken his nose. Because of that, Asel wanted to know what Ronan would do if there were retaliation. Ronan, however, was truly unconcerned and told his companion not to worry either, stating that Schlieffen was a good person, just a lunatic when it came to swords. Schlieffen valued his principles and trust. He was a model befitting his position and someone who protected the weak, practically the definition of a perfect noble. Because of that, Ronan believed Schlieffen had called what happened yesterday a fair duel. Otherwise, Ronan would already be in prison. Asel even agreed with him. In the end, Ronan wanted his companion to focus on what they were doing, pointing out that they had arrived at the mana vale Frieren had told them about. The place was known as Fernando's Spring. For unknown reasons, the mana that circulates around the world gathered in a single location, forming what was called a mana vale. There, mana was absorbed by everything around it. An ordinary stone could become a high-grade mana stone, and a common plant could turn into a miraculous medicinal herb. The place was known for its incredible effects, and its value was astronomical. Most people would want to monopolize it, and Ronan thought Professor Frieren was very generous. After all, they were being given something like this just for cracking an egg. Ronan asked whether his companion felt anything different. Asel said it was the first time he had ever seen so much mana concentrated in one place. There, he could use magic more easily and cast spells far stronger than usual. Asel also mentioned that the egg in Ronan's pocket, despite having done so before, was absorbing magical power at an incredible speed and seemed to love the mana in the area. Ronan didn't quite understand. Asel thought Maria would love it too, and it was a shame she was busy with the merchants. Then Asel noticed something and asked if Ronan didn't find it strange. Ronan didn't see what was wrong, so Asel explained that Professor Frieren had said there was an abundance of mana there, and that many mystical species came to nest in the area. Asel believed the place should even be good for ordinary animals, which left Ronan stunned. Asel then asked why they couldn't hear a single animal around them. That was when Ronan realized he had been complacent. He grew irritated, knowing things were about to get complicated again. Asel didn't understand what had happened, but Ronan told the mage to prepare himself, saying he could smell blood coming from deep within the forest. Asel couldn't sense anything, and Ronan confirmed that visitors had arrived before them. Obviously, by visitors, he meant intruders. Masked archers were already there, ready to fire arrows at the two of them. The arrows were loosed, and Ronan immediately drew his sword, shattering every single one. However, just by looking at the arrowheads, he was already certain who they belonged to. He remembered the squad's camp, where one of his comrades in his past life had shown him those arrows, making it clear that they were special arrows capable of blowing off the heads of most orcs. Someone asked what everyone thought, and Ronan was thoroughly fed up with the conversation. He told his teammate to shut up since no one wanted to hear it, especially because that archer had been caught using those very arrows. The man only tried to explain that the arrows were truly effective, saying that the person who had used them more than 100 times with successful hunts was an elite member of their organization. They were also known as Caliboros, hunting dogs. That memory convinced Ronan that it was the Caliboro again. He couldn't believe the Caliboro treated people as hunting dogs. Still, Ronan felt everything was under control. He told his companion to hide and asked him not to cry either, explaining that he was going to do something. He moved so fast he looked like Sonic. The archers saw what he had done and tried to understand how he had made that slash, since all of their arrows were imbued with mana. They wondered what the hell that guy was who was running so fast. In the blink of an eye, Ronan reached all of them. Panicking, they decided to surround the swordsman. Ronan saw how quick they were to make decisions and began to think that wasn't a good sign. The hunting dogs leapt high into the air, and Ronin shouted, telling them to unleash their attacks and asking if they couldn't recognize their own allies. The hunting dogs didn't understand what he meant. Ronin immediately began to bluff, declaring that he was the new hunting dog of the Damas lineage, and that his name was a Hayut. The men quickly dropped down, unable to believe he was a hunting dog. Ronin pressed them, asking if they really didn't believe him, but they couldn't swallow the idea that a child could be a hunting dog. They might have believed it if Ronin had claimed to be from a low-level branch. Ronin then told them that if they didn't believe him, they should ask the wolf of their lineage, leaving a small warning. Assuming others can't do what you yourself can't is a terrible habit. There was nothing more pathetic than that, and it left the young man extremely irritated. The hunting dog immediately demanded to know how Ronin dared to humiliate him, grabbing Ronin by his clothes and asking if he wanted to lose his arms. Ronin noticed that the hunting dog had another bad habit, constantly threatening others, because people who couldn't control themselves always ended up screwing themselves eventually. One of the other hunting dogs tried to calm his companion down, saying they really shouldn't doubt Ronin just because he was a child. Ronin understood how things worked and spoke confidently about the Caliboro system, something only insiders knew. He suggested it would be better to clear things up with the captain, because if Ronin wasn't lying, they would end up having trouble with the Damas lineage later. Just then, someone appeared out of nowhere, scolding them for not keeping quiet and demanding to know what was going on. It was their captain, a bald man covered in scars bearing the emblem of the Damire lineage, named Veyum. The man who had been doubting Ronin so vehemently was pleased that the captain had arrived and immediately tried to explain the whole situation. Ronin believed that for the wolf to come personally meant everyone was already present. Vum then asked Ronin to confirm whether he was Ahayute of the Damas lineage. Ronin promptly affirmed it, which Vum found strange. He asked what had brought Ronin there, since it had been decided that that part of the mountain belonged to Demir. Ronin simply replied that he didn't know anything about that, because he wasn't a Hayut. That answer left Veyum furious and confused. In an instant, Ronin split several of those hunting dogs in half, grape juice-like blood spraying everywhere. He explained to the Demire captain that he had just used the first name that came to his head. Ronin thought it was the perfect name to use when pretending to be a damned illegal hunter. He then moved toward the bald man and promptly took his head off, giving him quite the dramatic haircut. The man who had been picking a fight with Ronin couldn't understand how that had happened to his captain. Ronin asked if he remembered what he had said earlier about ending up screwed. Then Ronin ripped off the man's fingers, making him scream in sheer desperation. Ronin found it amusing to see him kneeling there, whimpering. The man was so shocked that he focused only on trying to put his fingers back in place. Ronin warned him that if he didn't want to die there, he should stand up and pick up the scroll Ronin had thrown. Ronin made it clear that from that moment on, the man would write down the locations of every lineage he knew. The man didn't understand what Ronin was getting at, and Ronin asked if there was a problem. Did he want to die? If he didn't complete the task, there was no reason for him to stay alive. Ronin's killing intent was overwhelmingly intense. The man quickly agreed, saying he would do it, but claimed he had nothing to write with. Ronin replied that he had already made him a pen right in his hand, specifically his right hand. Sometime later, as Ronin looked over the paper, he thought the man had done an excellent job and even told him he was quite talented. The man thanked him and asked if he would be spared as promised. Ronin immediately drew his sword and split the man in half like a piece of cheese. His killing intent truly was immense. The scene then shifted to Asel vomiting. Ronin thought that was a huge exaggeration. In any case, he had warned Asel to prepare himself. Asel apologized but said it had been too extreme. There was a pile of animal corpses nearby, and Asel couldn't believe it was the work of the Caliboro. That was why Ronin told his companion that letting the Caliboro live was a crime in itself. Asel was still worried, but Ronin didn't want him like that, reminding him that they were wanted criminals who needed to be killed. In the end, Ronin thought that if Professor Varen saw this, he would be deeply saddened. Asel then asked if they were going to head back. Suddenly, the egg inside Ronin's bag started moving against his waist, and he wondered what was happening. Asel quickly pointed ahead and called out to Ronin, asking what that thing in front of them was. When Ronin saw it, his eyes widened. The blood of the creatures was beginning to levitate, gathering and concentrating in midair. The blood then displayed an absurd force, and Asel looked like he might soil himself if he were physically able to. Ronin tried to understand what the hell was happening. Suddenly, the egg jumped out of the bag and began to glow right in front of him. Then it started absorbing all that blood. Asel asked Ronin what was going on, and Ronin made it clear that he had no idea. But he believed that whatever was inside that egg was definitely not normal, and so the egg absorbed all the blood in the area. The two of them watched until it was over, thinking the egg hadn't changed much. Then, all of a sudden, the egg began to crack, leaving both of them stunned. Ronin was overjoyed. It looked like the egg was finally going to hatch. He couldn't wait to see what would come out of it. And when the egg finally shattered, something burst out and slammed straight into his face. He wanted to understand what the hell was going on, and that thing that had appeared didn't really resemble a dream bird. It looked more like a cat mixed with other creatures that had somehow gained wings. Ronin couldn't see that creature as a bird at all. Asel thought it looked more like a dragon, just like the ones he had seen in books, and Ronin agreed with him. Then Ronin scolded himself, wondering where the hell that dragon had absorbed so much mana to end up like that, before remembering the bluebird. In the end, he thought that at least least the creature was pretty cute, and even petted it, despite still being quite angry. The dragon's welcome had been a bit too much. Getting punched hard in the face wasn't the best way to greet someone. Suddenly, the dragon caused a magical rune to appear, startling Ronin until he realized his wound had vanished. Asel immediately believed the dragon had healing magic. On top of that, it seemed to like Ronin, and the dragon began rubbing its face against his. The swordsman was surprised, as the dragon had more abilities than it appeared to. Asel thought Ronin should give the dragon a name, since they couldn't keep calling it a dream bird. Ronin had no idea what name would be good for it. Suddenly, the dragon started making a lot of noise and flew up into the air. Asel didn't understand why it had suddenly started acting that way, while Ronin thought the dragon had sensed a presence. The scene then shifts to a desperate man running. He was a vagrant from the Demire branch named Balrouse. He just wanted to understand what was happening. He had only gone out to do a task and now wanted to know why everyone there was dead. He also remembered seeing a sea of blood when he spotted the two boys. Panicking, he tried to flee to save his life. However, the dragon sensed his presence and went after him, his eyes wide with terror. He was so unlucky that he crashed into a branch and took a hard fall to the ground. That made it even easier for the dragon to catch up to him. The dragon quickly began drawing Balrouse's blood from the wound that had opened on his knee after the fall. Balrouse couldn't understand what was happening as he watched his blood being pulled out of his body, and he cried out for help. Ronin arrived and ordered the dragon to stop, but the dragon didn't understand why it should. Ronin explained to the dragon that it was enough and that it would end up killing him, and he called the dragon Sita. Asel immediately asked if that was going to be the dragon's name, and Ronin confirmed it, saying he had already had that name in mind. He asked whether the creature liked its name. Balrouse couldn't understand who those two were, though he clearly remembered Ronin and Asel standing near all that blood. He hadn't imagined that Ronin was the owner of that creature. Now he just wanted to know who that boy was. Ronin asked Balrouse if he was alright and called him by name. Balrouse confirmed it and thanked Ronin, thinking he was going to lose his life. Still, he didn't understand how Ronin knew his name. In response, Ronin pointed his sword at Balrouse with incredible speed, declaring that the hooded man didn't need to know. He hadn't expected to meet Balrouse like this, but it was good to see him again. Ronin also remarked that illegal hunting seemed profitable, and that he never would have imagined Balrouse would become one of Caliboro's hunting dogs. Balrouse didn't understand what Ronin was talking about and said he was just a vagrant. Ronin clearly remembered that Balrouse's rank had been lower back then. In the end, the swordsman ordered Balrouse to do something for him, making it clear he wasn't asking, he was commanding. The scene then abruptly shifts to nighttime. Ronin tossed a few coins into the air and thought it was great, far better than he had expected. Asel was surprised as well. He recalled Ronin saying that even water could be turned into gold. Asel had been confused when Ronin collected some of it, but he had never imagined that Maria's father would offer such a high price for it. He believed they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore, and Ronin agreed, though he pointed out that they were indebted to Professor Frieren in many ways. They planned to thank him for everything and show him Sita, but when they arrived at Frieren's room, they found a sign saying he had gone on a business trip, which was a shame for both boys. There was also the task Ronin had given Balrouse. The map he had received from that hunting dog was more than simple gratitude. Ronin had instilled so much fear that he believed Balrouse wouldn't even think of doing anything wrong. Asel then asked what Ronin planned to do with the money. Since the top-ranked students were exempt from academy fees and even received support funds, Ronin didn't really have such large debts to pay. Ronin paused to think about it and realized that the entrance ceremony was approaching. The scene then shifts to a few days later at the carriage station in the city of Valon, where a knight informed the lady inside the carriage that they had arrived at their destination, and she thanked him. She had never seen the capital before, and this was Ronin's sister, Earl. She was amazed by what the capital was like. Ronin was right behind her, thinking his sister must be tired from the journey. She was very happy to see him, and Ronin asked if anything had happened while he was away, but she made it clear that she was the one who should be asking him that. She was quite surprised to see a high-class carriage in front of their house, and wanted to know how that was possible, since he had no money. She also wanted to know why he had lost so much weight and started pinching his cheeks, asking if he had been eating properly. Ronin told Earl not to worry and said that he had been eating well. She felt relieved until she noticed Sita on his shoulders and found the creature incredibly cute. Ronin introduced the creature to his sister and explained that Sita was now his new companion. He also told her that they needed to hurry because they didn't have much time. Earl wanted to know where they were going so suddenly. Ronin took her by the hand and said that he would be busy for a while once he entered the academy, and that there were some things he wanted to do beforehand, something he really needed to take care of. With that, they went to a shop. Earl felt awkward. She knew he had made a lot of money recently and understood that the academy provided support, but she still thought his gift was far too expensive. She was wearing a dress that looked absolutely beautiful on her. And the worst part was that he wasn't just giving his sister one gift, he was buying her lots of things. Ronin thought it wasn't all that much and even planned to buy her more, saying it was about time she received something from him. Earl grew emotional, unable to understand when Ronin had grown up so much. She started shouting, wanting to tell everyone how kind her brother was. Ronin felt embarrassed, while the clothing store staff found the whole situation very amusing. After all the awkwardness, Ronan decided to leave. Errol asked where they were going next, and Ronan explained that they were going to explore the city, and that his sword had been damaged some time ago because of a lunatic. As he was leaving the shop, Schlieffen was standing outside, waiting, asking if Ronan was finally done. It was literally a case of speak of the devil. Ronan, along with Sita, was badly startled, and asked if Schlieffen was some kind of stalker. Schlieffen explained that he had come to pick up a new sword he had ordered nearby. The sword he had been using had become defective because of Ronan, and since he happened to see Ronan by coincidence, he decided to wait. He then told Ronan to stop behaving in such a repulsive and disrespectful way. Ronan, meanwhile, thought that was exactly the behavior of a stalker, and still hadn't understood what had really happened to Schlieffen's sword. He grew quite irritated and grabbed his own sword, asking whether Schlieffen was still going to keep saying things like that after seeing the state of his blade, believing that Schlieffen should have been the real culprit. Ronan wanted to show him what a truly defective sword looked like. Schlieffen also drew his sword, thinking it wasn't a bad idea, revealing that he had been waiting for a rematch. Errol quickly stepped between the two of them, not wanting a fight to break out so suddenly. Ronan tried to explain to his sister that she was mistaken and that Schlieffen had started the whole mess, but she didn't want him to answer back. Schlieffen didn't understand what was going on. Errol then apologized to Schlieffen, explaining that her brother sometimes lacked manners but was a good person. Schlieffen, heir to a great noble family, the Grancia family, a rising star of the empire, experienced the next moments as if he were gazing upon a goddess, his eyes wide open. Errol apologized again for not having disciplined her brother well enough. Schlieffen felt a little embarrassed, his cheeks flushed, and said that it was due to his own lack of discretion and that it wasn't her fault. Everything that had happened was his responsibility, and she should not worry. Errol thought he was very kind and began to see him as her brother's friend, which made her very happy. She took his hand, putting him on alert, and asked him to take care of her brother from that day on. He didn't refuse. Naturally, Ronan had no idea what was going on. Soon, Schlieffen changed his attitude and wanted to compensate Errol for her brother's sword. He didn't have any gold with him at the moment, so he decided to give her his family's proof of identification, something that could be used anywhere in the Empire. Ronan was completely shocked by what was happening and asked if Schlieffen was sure about what he was doing. Schlieffen made it clear that if he intended to buy a sword, he could go to the blacksmith at the end of the street. He explained that it was a place known for carrying a 500-year legacy, so it was difficult for commoners to enter, but with that identification, they would be able to get in. In that way, he hoped Ronan would manage to forge a good sword for him. From that moment on, Ronan began to think that Schlieffen was truly crazy, but Errol really did look like a goddess and completely hooked everyone's attention. With a Grancia identification, it would have been possible to buy an entire village. It was there that Ronan saw how the Sword Saint acted and no longer even knew whether he truly knew Schlieffen anymore. Then the scene shifted to the next day, at the entrance ceremony of Frieren Academy, where Director Krava said a few words to the newcomers and introduced himself to them, making it clear that all of them had passed with incredible abilities and had proven they possessed the potential to be there when their amazing talents and Filian's prestigious education would collide. The old man believed they would go down in the history of the Empire, and so he congratulated all the newcomers on their admission. That was class 787. Ronan thought it was grand, but all of it made him sleepy. Still, he didn't think it was so bad since his sister liked it. Krava quickly snapped his fingers, and an aura began to flow around the students. And suddenly the sky started to crack. All of a sudden, they were in a kind of coliseum, and the director once again made it clear that it was a pleasure to meet everyone. Ronan wanted to understand what had happened. The director had simply teleported the entire place with a snap of his fingers. The director announced that this was the climax of Filian's entrance ceremony, and they would begin a match between veterans and freshmen. It was something that happened as the first encounter between these two groups. The process was usually intense, and was also a special event at Filion. It worked in such a way that the first and second in the rankings represented the freshmen, and each of them was assigned to one of the second-year brackets, each with their own individual fighting style. Then, a one-on-one battle would take place. Director Krava explained that the event was directly connected to Filion's instructors, and was not about the teachers, but about the relationship between freshmen and veterans, as they learned about each other's weaknesses. He believed they would complement one another. Healthy competition was the beginning of true education. They were educational duels, and through them, each representative would demonstrate their first steps. The freshmen could choose their opponents, and it was also possible to refuse a duel. The director did not want anyone to feel intimidated. The freshman representatives were free to do as they pleased. Ronan thought the old man knew how to use words well, but he still felt it was a kind of hazing for the freshmen. There was Nazdo, a second-year martial artist who ranked first. There was also Brahm, another second-year martial artist ranked second, who was eager as he watched that year's famous newcomers. There was also Karen, a second-year martial artist ranked fourth. Beside him stood a girl, also a second-year martial artist, ranked third. Her name was Irina. Krava announced to everyone the greatest talent of the Empire, Schlieffen, and the star who had defeated him in the practical exam, Ronan. Brahm could no longer hold himself back and wanted to fight both of them. Ronan thought Brahm was overly excited, and since things had turned out that way, he felt he could show his older sister that he wasn't there just to get beaten by others. It would be better if he could show his camaraderie with Schlieffen. Then he was caught off guard by the director asking the freshmen to choose their opponent for the duel. Ronan asked whether it would be all right for him to make a suggestion, and Krava saw no problem with it. Ronan then said that, since they were free to choose, he wanted to be taught by all the respectable veterans. The veterans were left confused, and Ronan laughed and clarified that he wanted all of them to come at the same time. After that suggestion, the director went to the teachers for a brief meeting. He asked Nabaros what she thought of Ronan's proposal, and she believed they should proceed with it. After all, the academy followed the rule that if one was strong enough, one could do as one pleased. In her view, it didn't matter who would win, as it would still be a great challenge for everyone. And if things became dangerous, Nabaros gave her word that she would intervene. Krava then quickly decided they would go ahead. Meanwhile, the students stared at Ronan. Karun thought it was absurd for a freshman to so blatantly underestimate them, and Irina felt that Ronan was being conceited because he was in the spotlight. Nasdo, however, wanted his colleagues to calm down, and although he found Ronan arrogant, he was certain that Schlieffen was skilled, so they could not underestimate their opponents. Nasdo told his comrades to go all out from the very beginning. Soon, the veterans began to prepare, while Iril's voice was already trembling as she felt the atmosphere grow far too chaotic. Worried, she wanted Ronan to be careful and started shouting, telling him to give up if things became too dangerous. Seeing his sister shouting like that, Ronan tried to reassure her in some way. At that moment, the director announced that the first match between veterans and a freshman was about to begin. Nasdo wasted no time and charged straight at Ronan, trying to strike him, but Ronan managed to dodge the attack. Ronan quickly realized that they were skilled and several levels above Maria had been back then. That meant the four strongest second years were on an entirely different level. He blocked the attack coming from Irina, who was staring at him with a devilish expression. Ronan swiftly sent a shock through her sword. Then Karun told Irina to duck and attempted to strike Ronan, who remained almost completely still, easily blocking the thrust Karun made with his spear. Ronan also thought their teamwork wasn't bad. The impact he received after blocking dragged him several meters back until he noticed Brahm behind him wielding a gigantic sword. Brahm wanted to understand why Ronan was doing this, making it clear that he wanted a fiercer duel with him. He tried to land a blow. Ronan saw that it was fast and powerful, followed by consecutive attacks, and realized that the veterans were not playing around. At that moment, all the veterans charged at him at once, trying to strike him. Ronan quickly leaped, and Brahm ended up smashing the ground. The other veterans were shocked by the freshman's sudden disappearance. Irina, quite frightened, wanted to understand what kind of speed that was, and then she saw Ronan behind her. Ronan realized that Filion was truly incredible, and struck all the veterans at once, breaking their weapons and knocking several of them to the ground. Then he noticed Brahm still standing, and realized that Brahm wasn't just a big guy for show. He was proving that he was truly strong. Ronan thought he should have crushed his fighting spirit, but decided it was better to show respect until the end. In an instant, he appeared in front of Brahm, who couldn't understand how the young man had suddenly appeared right before him. Brahm immediately recognized the stance. It was Professor Nabaros says. A moment later, he was hit with full force by Ronan, who also made sure to break Brahm's sword, making it clear that he had learned a great deal from the veterans. His sarcasm was obvious as it lingered in the air. Iril stood there with her mouth agape at the result her little brother had achieved, and she wasn't the only one. The other spectators also wanted to understand what was so special about the freshman Ronan, because he had displayed overwhelming ability against the veterans. Everyone had obviously thought he would lose, but he defeated them all in the blink of an eye. No one could believe he was a first-year student. The veterans stared at their broken weapons, unable to believe it. Nasdo found the defeat so one-sided that he couldn't even feel sad about losing. He only wanted to know where Ronan had come from. The veterans thought he was a monster. Ronan, on the other hand, felt that in the end, this should prevent any further trouble, while Iril looked truly happy among the spectators. Now he only had to deal with the veterans who approached him and told him he had done a good job. Ronan bowed respectfully and made it clear that he had learned a lot from them. He also explained that he had put himself in that position because he was excited about having entered Filion Academy, but he believed their strength was unimaginable. From the bottom of his heart, he thanked them all for accepting the challenge, while Maria and Asel were shocked by what Ronan was saying. Ronan asked everyone to forgive his rude behavior that day and said he was eager to learn even more. In the end, he lowered his head, leaving the veterans feeling a bit awkward. Brahm then realized he had been mistaken about Ronan. Not only was he strong, but he was also very respectful. He took Ronan's hand and told him there was no need to be so formal, saying that Ronan had fought fairly using only his abilities to claim claim victory and that he should feel confident. Brahm then raised the young man's arm for everyone to see and shouted that this was how a Filian student should be, declaring that everything had been incredible. Ronan realized that Brahm truly had boundless energy. He had already shown his social skills and was certain that Errol would no longer worry about him. She was moved to see how much her brother had grown, while someone else watched it all and thought Ronan was truly interesting. After that, the scene shifted to nighttime, when a banquet was being held and all the freshmen were gathered together. Ronan was surprised and genuinely curious about what a ceremonial banquet would be like, and the venue was enormous. Maria had already expected this, since it was the greatest educational institution of all. Listening to his friend, Ronan felt that he really shouldn't be surprised anymore by anything he saw at that academy. Asel then asked Ronan whether he had seen his sister. Ronan confirmed and explained that it had taken him some time to comfort his sister, since she had truly been worried about him. He clearly remembered her asking him not to forget to eat his meals, to write down anything he might forget, and not to fight with his friends. He had also decided to leave Sita with her so she could remain safe and he could be at ease while staying at the academy. Asel thought Ronan was an incredible brother, and Ronan agreed with his friend. Still, Ronan was extremely curious about what the food there tasted like and wondered when the poor guy would finally get to try it. Suddenly, Schlieffen appeared beside him like a ghost, whispering in his ear and making it clear that this was not the right time to eat. Ronan immediately looked to the side, startled, trying to understand what had happened to Schlieffen. Annoyed, he demanded to know why Schlieffen was there, but Schlieffen explained that he had only come to check on something important. Ronan couldn't understand where he was going with this. Schlieffen asked where Ronan's sister was living and whether it was far from there. Ronan grew even more confused as Schlieffen continued, asking about the condition of the road to where his sister lived. To make matters worse, he also wanted to know whether the security was good and if there had been any reports of incidents, leaving Ronan increasingly frustrated by the questions. Schlieffen then assumed that Ronan had hired escorts and trusted that he had at least contracted a mercenary army to protect his sister. Otherwise, Schlieffen said, he would be a terrible brother. Ronan became furious and declared that he had hired Schlieffen's mother to escort his sister. Ronan thought that unless a wyvern showed up, nothing bad would happen, and he told Schlieffen to calm down. However, the moment Schlieffen heard that name, he became alarmed and demanded to know whether Ronan was really telling the truth. Ronan, obviously irritated, just wanted that madman to stay away from him. Ronan also wanted to understand why Schlieffen cared so much about his sister. It was starting to feel as if he were her husband. Schlieffen immediately began to tremble, and in a choked voice he explained that he was simply worried about the girl who had become his friend, and that this was the duty of a knight. At that moment, someone arrived and commented that it was an interesting scene, saying he had never seen a Grancia wolf so talkative before. Schlieffen immediately asked what that girl wanted with him. Her name was Elizabeth Akalucia, and her claim to fame was being the best freshman in the magic class. Elizabeth smiled and told him not to misunderstand. Her interest was in Ronan, not in him. Her words naturally left Ronan stunned. He wanted to be sure she was really talking about him and couldn't understand why. Schlieffen, on the other hand, thought it was just Ronan's unpleasant charm at work again. Schlieffen soon turned his back on the two of them, saying that things there were finished and that Elizabeth could do as she pleased. Before leaving, he informed Ronan that he was considering sending a guard from the Grancia family, but Ronan didn't even let him finish speaking and told the Sword Saint to go bother someone else. Asel then approached Ronan and told the swordsman that this was the same person as before, and Ronan replied that he was already aware of how powerful she was. Ronan soon recalled Elizabeth with her staff overflowing with energy as she finished off an opponent, and he knew she was ridiculously powerful. Elizabeth merely remarked that those who raised their claws needed to be taught a lesson. Ronan had no idea what she meant and asked why she wanted to speak with him. She was brief and explained that she had been impressed by his talent, so she was there to make him an offer so special that a mere criminal could never dream of it. She then showed him an item. Ronan was shocked and confused, asking whether she was offering him an Akalucia invitation. Unlike most nobles, the Akalucia prioritized talent above all else. They had produced many gifted individuals and secured their position as one of the two pillars of the empire. They offered opportunities to those with the potential to become part of the family, and the symbol of that opportunity was the Akalucia invitation. Ronan asked whether Elizabeth was even allowed to give that to people. Seeing that he asked such a question, she realized that he already knew what it was. Ronan explained that he had heard about it in passing, and then remembered a time at a camp when he had also held such an invitation in his hands, given to him by a commander who wanted him, despite being a commoner, to become part of a great family. Adeshin had also been an Akalucia, and she made it clear that he would need to pass a test administered by the patriarch. However, someone truly talented would have no trouble passing it. She told him to keep that in mind. Once he paid for his sins and through his deeds in that war, he might eventually receive one of those invitations, since she believed he was very talented. In the end, Elizabeth explained that she was simply showing him what the invitation looked like. She felt no need to explain further and hoped he would make the right choice. She made it clear that it didn't matter if one was born a beast. If they stayed among sheep long enough, they would become like them. With that, she left. Asel let out a huge sigh of relief. Ronan realized that geniuses really did whatever they pleased, and he didn't think it was so bad since now he had a way to make contact. The Akalusha could be useful to him. The scene then shifted to early morning, outside the educational institution that valued students' abilities above all else, Frieren Academy. Depending on an individual's grades, the atmosphere around them could change drastically. And the clearest example of this was the dormitory system. The place where intermediate-level students were housed was Nataya Hall. Each person had a clean private room and a high-end coffee machine. It was an incredible dormitory with everything a student needed. However, students with the lowest rankings were sent to Crowder Hall. On their very first day there, the students were already outraged, trying to understand what the hell that place was. Some simply couldn't accept that they had to stay in such a place. After all, they were all nobles and even wanted servants, but one of the academy's staff members informed them that there were no servants assigned to Crater Hall. Everything there was different. 4 people shared each room, and the coffee machines and showers were all shared, along with the bathrooms. The staff member made it very clear that he didn't want anyone glaring at him, since those were the academy's rules. All they had to do was study so they wouldn't end up there again next semester, and that left everyone terrified. Finally, the best students, including Ronin, were placed in Nebuchadnezzar Hall. It was hard to describe the first impression of that place in just one sentence. Ronin stared at it wide-eyed and thought it was amazing. He wondered if they really did all of that just for the students, and realized that this truly was a prestigious academy. Then he remembered the class registration they had explained earlier. He had to write down which classes he wanted to attend. He needed to adjust during his first year, and he had heard that it wasn't a good idea to choose too many classes. Still, all of them looked appealing to him. This was a very common misunderstanding among newcomers who hadn't yet experienced hell. After that, he made his choices and thought everything was perfect. It might have been a bit too much, but since he was at that academy, he wanted to attend all the classes he truly wanted. The scene then shifted to a professor telling Ronin that he was finished. He no longer needed to attend that class. The man was the main instructor of Imperial Fencing Basics. His name was Abar. Ronin didn't understand anything at first. His voice caught as he tried to understand what Abar meant, since they had just begun. Abar smiled at him and explained that he knew they had only just started, but Ronin had perfectly mastered all the basic techniques of Imperial fencing. He also explained that the Academy's rules allowed a student to be dismissed from a class if they were already more than prepared. If Ronin stayed, the other students might lose motivation. Even so, Abar didn't want Ronin to become arrogant because of it. He should simply move on. The scene then shifted to Ronin sitting by the water, looking frustrated as he began to lament. It wasn't just Imperial fencing. The same thing had happened with archery and monster hunting as well. He couldn't believe he had been dismissed from all his classes. It left him extremely irritated, and he hadn't expected this at all. Then Nabaros noticed him and approached, asking whether Ronin shouldn't be in class. He was surprised to see her, and Nabaros quickly understood that he had already finished all his classes. Ronin stood up and confirmed it, asking if all classes were going to be like that. He vented to Professor Nabaros that he had expected Frieren to be better than this. She thought that while these were only the first classes of the first year, for him to finish them all on the very first day was still impressive. She remembered that it had taken him only a glance to copy her technique. She then declared that, as a teacher, she couldn't simply overlook that, and asked him to hand over his sword. Ronin didn't quite understand. Nabaros took the sword from his hand and told him she was going to teach him an important lesson, though he still didn't understand why she had done so. Suddenly, a powerful impact occurred behind him. Ronin was startled, while Nabaros remarked that this was all that piece of metal could do, and that something like that couldn't even be called a weapon. It would only hinder his abilities. She told him to watch carefully. Quickly, she drew her own sword. When Ronin saw it, his eyes went wide. Nabaros made a single movement, and a massive amount of water began to rise, while fierce winds swept through the area, frightening him. Her power was truly on another level. Soon, she made it start raining, and now she wanted to know whether Ronin could find what was missing. A weapon is a piece of metal that is hard and sharp, used to fight opponents, and it should not break while being wielded, and even if it does, a new one can be obtained. Weapons in that sense are disposable, or at least that was what Ronin thought, until he saw what his instructor managed to do right in front of him. Ronin thought it was ridiculous, and he was certain that she had used the sword in her hands. The cut was the same, but he could not understand how the power was so different just because of the weapon. With a single breath and reliable force, Nabaros explained how such a small difference on a battlefield, where lives are at stake, or the waste of strength, is what determines whether an individual lives or dies. If one is using mana, it is essential to find a weapon that matches. And obviously that was not something Ronin understood yet, since he still did not know how to use mana. Ronin wanted to know if the instructor already knew this, and she confirmed it, but made it clear that the fact he possessed so much energy was incredible to her. Nabaros knew that one day he would be able to use mana, and that in order to use that power correctly, she believed Ronin needed a weapon. From what she was seeing, the student had too many things on his mind, so she wanted him to attend attend her class. Ronan was surprised and wanted to know if he really could. Even though normally only those above the second year were allowed, Nabarose was willing to let him in. However, instead of bringing that piece of metal, the instructor asked him to bring a real weapon. That was the condition she set for him to participate in her class. Next, the scene shifts to a place with a sign that had the word hammer written 3 times. Asel and Maria were together with Ronan, and Asel wanted to know if something like that had happened with instructor Nabarose, and if that was why she had gone to that place on her first day off. That was the place Schlieffen had mentioned when he handed over his family's identification item. They were at the forge, and Asel was not very confident, while Maria also thought it looked quite worn down and unlikely to last long. Ronan also found it very strange that this forge would really be a place frequented by the Grancia family. Still, the 3 of them would only know once they went inside, and inside it was even worse. There were cobwebs everywhere, and the building looked like it was about to collapse. Ronan found it odd, since Schlieffen was not the kind of person who lied. A creature with enormous claws was disturbed by the noise while sleeping, and it quickly appeared, wanting to know who the 3 of them were. Making it very clear that they were making noise early in the morning, it asked whether they hadn't noticed that the fire was out. Asel was quite frightened, and Ronan was surprised by what he was seeing. It was a beast man in a forge, but the beast man was not very welcoming, and wanted to know if the 3 of them were deaf. He demanded an immediate explanation for why they were there. But Ronan wasted no time and showed what Schlieffen had given him, explaining that they were there to buy a weapon, clarifying that they had come on Schlieffen's recommendation. Since he had said that the law's weapons were the best, the beastman saw the symbol of the Grancia family. He could also tell that Maria and Asel had mana, but the swordsman had nothing, so he thought that Ronan showing the Grancia family symbol meant nothing. Ronan truly did not understand what the beastman was getting at. The beastman claimed he didn't know who had leaked information about that place, but he wanted them all to leave, since the shop did not accept customers like them. Ronan immediately refused, until the beastman thought there might be a way for them to make a deal. And at that moment, he looked like a big bad wolf. He wanted the poor Asel's arm in exchange, then he might consider making a sword for Ronan. Making it clear that he was getting hungry, Asel immediately panicked and said that he didn't taste very good. Ronan saw the enormous mouth of that wolf and made it clear that he had crossed the line. He simply attacked the wolf inside his own establishment. The beastman had no idea what the hell had just happened, and the impact was so great that he was dragged across his shop. Ronan soon realized that what he had imagined was correct. The movement had felt strange to him, and he wanted to know where that had come from out of nowhere. The wolf was wearing armor. In any case, Ronan thought it didn't matter what it was. Something like that only needed to be destroyed. He revealed his completely macabre aura, and the wolf grew afraid and asked him to wait a moment, making it clear that it had only been a test. Ronan was confused as the wolf explained that all new customers went through this kind of thing, as it was protocol to test their abilities. The wolf also admitted that he needed to test his invisible armor, and that he had deliberately provoked Ronan. He added that he had no intention of hurting them. Ronan truly could not believe the wolf's words and asked if he thought Ronan looked like an idiot. The wolf then made it clear that, considering the way the Grancia family operated, it would be stranger if they didn't have a process like this. The wolf soon assured him that if Ronan was doubting it, he could talk to Schlieffen later. Ronan grew a little impatient, but thought it was a fine process for a violent death. The wolf quickly corrected him, saying that this was not part of the process, and that the fault was entirely his for having gone too far. In that way, he apologized to Asel for everything that had happened, since he had no intention of provoking him, and in any case, he did not devour people. Asel hid behind Maria, while feeling a bit more relieved. After that terrible confusion, the wolf introduced himself. His name was Didakan, and he was an apprentice at that forge, sometimes guarding the gate. He soon asked for the swordsman's name, and Ronan introduced himself to the wolf. Didakan already knew that he was there in search of a weapon, so he informed them that he would show them the way, since that place was only the entrance to the forge, and the real place was where he was pointing. The scene then shifts to Didakan asking if everyone was properly settled. He asked everyone to prepare themselves mentally and pressed a button on the wall. The gears began to turn, and Didakan said that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Soon the elevator began to descend, and everyone was astonished. Watching the mechanism in motion, Didakan explained that it was an elevator made with a magic stone and a pulley, the fastest way to reach the true forge. He declared that it was the largest and best forge in the capital, better known as the Grand Carpadoki. Ronan had never imagined that something like that existed underground, and Didakan wanted him to cheer up, since he had passed the test. Didakan was fully responsible for taking him to the very best of Carpadoki. There, a dwarf was hammering away, and Didakan made it clear that this was the best master blacksmith in the entire capital. Watching all that production, Ronan thought it was incredible, and Didakan explained that the forge supplied items only to the royal family and the nobility. Without exaggeration, Didakan made it clear that all skilled masters were present there. However, the one who held the title of the best was the elder dwarf who lived there. Didakan explained that he was a master who had been melting metal for hundreds of years. The old man was difficult, but his skills were incomparable, and Didakan respected him greatly, showing the complete opposite opposite when he kicked the door open with his own foot. He immediately asked what the old man was doing and announced that he had brought guests while the dwarf continued hammering the metal. He recognized it was Didakon right away, just from the terrible commotion at the entrance, and he made it clear that Didakon should keep quiet while he was working. Didakon replied that he couldn't do anything about it, since there were weapons blocking the door and he couldn't open it. He then asked the elder, named Daron, to clear the place. The dwarf thought the wolf complained too much for his age. Daron hoped that the guests he had brought were not too troublesome. Didakon was certain the guest was good, since he himself had tested the swordsman. He stated that Ronan's sword skills were excellent and was sure Daron would be impressed when he saw them. Daron's jaw dropped, finding it truly unexpected because judging by appearances, Ronan looked like nothing more than a child. He then asked Ronan to show a bit of his fencing, as he could tell many things with just a glance. Ronan picked up his sword to demonstrate a little, but as soon as Daron saw the blade, he snatched it from Ronan's hand and said it was nothing but trash. The dwarf couldn't believe the swordsman had been carrying that garbage all this time, and he struck it with his hammer, completely shattering the sword. Ronan was outraged, unable to understand why the old man had done that. Daron pointed to one of the swords and said that Ronan could use any of them, because with the terrible sword he had been holding, he would never be able to show his true abilities. The elder also didn't want the swordsman to worry, and promised to give him any sword for free so that he wouldn't feel cheated. In any case, whichever sword Ronan chose would be far better than the one he had before, which Daron considered nothing but trash. Ronan was surprised, and since the dwarf insisted, he picked up a sword and immediately felt that the sensation was completely different. Still, he wanted to know if it really made that much of a difference. He warned them that it wouldn't be his fault if he ended up destroying something. Daron was fine with that and declared that Ronan could perform the best move of his life. Ronan looked at his own reflection in the sword for a moment and remembered instructor Nabaros. Quickly, he took his stance, and Daron was immediately surprised because he already knew whose technique that was. Ronan then executed the move, causing a massive explosion in the place. The other workers had no idea what had happened. Ronan had simply destroyed the wall of Elder Daron's workshop. The workers couldn't understand what was going on, since it was still midday, and they began to believe that a furnace had exploded. Daron was incredulous as dust flew everywhere. Ronan himself had not imagined he would cause so much destruction. A trail along the ground showed how far the force had dragged, and the swordsman himself wanted to understand what had just happened, making it clear that he had never intended to do something like that. Daron soon stated that the technique Ronan had used belonged to Nabaros, and the dwarf wanted to know if Ronan was her disciple. Ronan was surprised and asked whether Daron knew instructor Nabaros. The dwarf made it clear that he did, explaining that he was the one who had forged her sword. This truly caught the swordsman's attention, since his instructor's sword, despite being absurdly long, had always stood out to him. Nabaros's mysterious sword was called Urusa. Daron explained that it was one of the few masterpieces he had forged in his entire life. He clarified that what Ronan was holding could not be compared to Urusa at all, but in any case, the dwarf wanted to know what Ronan thought of it. The swordsman found it truly incredible, and never imagined things would turn out that way. Daron believed he ought to be saying that, since he thought Ronan was a novice who could not properly judge his own abilities. Daron showed clear excitement, as it had been a long time since he had met someone with such talent, and he ended up slapping the poor Ronan on the back. The dwarf also thought it was problematic that Ronan was so talented, because it would be difficult to forge a good sword for him. The sword Ronan had used could not withstand his strikes. It had already been cracking. Ronan didn't know what to do, and Daron began to think that ordinary materials would not work. He needed steel of the highest quality. Daron believed he would need at least a byproduct from a wyvern. Ronan immediately showed what he had on hand, something he had kept without knowing whether it would be useful. The dwarf ended up seeing an eggshell. The scene then shifts to Daron hammering away as usual, unable to believe his eyes. A mithril hammer did not even scratch the eggshell. Daron had no idea that something so resilient could exist. Daron's eyes lit up, and he asked if Ronan was sure he could use something so valuable. Ronan didn't see a problem, since the eggshell was useless to him, but he also wanted to know if it would be enough to make a sword. Daron, extremely pleased, affirmed that it was and asked Ronan to return in 2 weeks, declaring that he would forge the best sword in the Empire for him. Ronan grew excited at the thought. Seeing Maria and Asel, Daron said that since they were there with Ronan, they should look for the other masters. Maria didn't hide her excitement. Daron didn't want to leave the friends of someone so valuable empty-handed, explaining that all they needed to do was mention Daron's recommendation, and any of the masters there would take care of them. He wanted to do something for Ronan's friends, but he wouldn't do anything beyond melting down that eggshell himself. He seemed extremely excited about all of it, and the 3 academy students were a bit frightened, thinking the dwarf was slightly unhinged. The scene then shifts to a cavernous place with many torches, where several hooded figures were irritated by the noise from the people above, and even felt like incinerating them all at once. However, they had to restrain themselves, as it was not yet time to reveal themselves. Though in any case, that time was not far off. There were stone golems there, and those as people people swore they would first get rid of the blacksmiths they considered ignorant. An unknown society lived down below, waiting for the day when everything in that empire would disappear and be consumed by the approaching light. The scene then shifts to a few days later, where Ronin was casually walking outside the academy, remembering clearly that the blacksmith, said to be the best in the empire, had promised to make him a sword. Both Asel and Maria had managed to place orders with the other blacksmiths. It would be a bit expensive, but Ronin didn't mind. After all, the money wasn't his. He had used the item that identified Schlieffen's family for that feat, and if there were any problems, it would only be a matter of time until his sword was ready. Sighing, he wondered what he should do until that moment arrived. He believed his two friends were in class at that time until he suddenly realized something. The training center and the exclusive classes for veterans were located right where he was, the place known as the Galilean facility. He believed instructor Nabaros's classes also took place there. She had told him to come to her class with a real weapon. He still didn't have his weapon in hand, but he had something to use temporarily. As he considered going to her class, Nabaros appeared beside him like a ghost. He was startled by his instructor's sudden presence. It was basically the saying, "Speak of the devil," and she grabbed his ear and twisted it, scolding him as she did. It had already been a long time, and the poor boy screamed in pain. She was certain she had told him to show up there as soon as he obtained a weapon. Absolutely certain. She wanted to know what on earth her student had been doing all this time, since he hadn't shown up at all. She wanted to know if he had simply been skipping class. Ronin explained that it wasn't exactly that, and that he had a good reason for not showing up, but Nabaros told him to forget it and follow her. She said she would listen to his excuses along the way. All Ronin wanted was for her to let go of him because it hurt a lot. The scene then shifts to a girl who overheard it and didn't understand what had happened. She was inside the academy and was sure she had heard someone scream until she ended up bumping into another student. The boy's name was Carden. She apologized, and he thought she was a very slow assistant, telling her she should be getting ready for class since she had so much time to stand around. Carden thought the girl was truly a loser. In the end, the girl simply turned her back on him, and the scene shifts to the first dueling hall. Nabaros showed Ronin to the students and was sure they remembered him, since he had caused quite a commotion when he first arrived. Even so, she introduced him again, explaining that he would be part of the class starting that day. Ronin then introduced himself, and the students immediately began whispering. They were surprised that Ronin had skipped ahead to their class and started questioning whether he was really that good, since in the end, he just looked like a kid. Ronin was surprised by their nerve, since he could hear everything they were saying, but he also noticed some welcoming faces. Brahm and Nazdo seemed happy about his presence. However, not everyone was pleased. Karun kept his face completely straight. Still, Ronin thought it would be fun, until the girl who had bumped into Cardan opened the door and apologized to the instructor for being late. Ronin immediately looked back, and the girl with a shaky voice explained that she had to deal with something urgent. Ronin felt a sense of familiarity in her voice, as Nabaros asked whether she had really been that late, but the instructor only told her to calm down. Nabaros explained that she had just introduced a new student and pointed in Ronin's direction. The girl became excited, as she knew he was the famous newcomer the instructor had mentioned. Nabaros then asked the girl to introduce herself to Ronin, since he needed to know who the assistant was. The girl introduced herself as the class assistant and said she was a second-year martial arts student. Ronin's eyes widened when she smiled and said her name was Adation. She extended her hand to greet Ronin, who was utterly shocked to see the great commander standing right in front of him. Adation Akalucha was renowned for her incredible command ability and was the first woman to reach the rank of Grand Commander. She dominated the battlefield with her unmatched judgment and leadership. She was also known as the Iron Lady, and those who had served under her said that Adashan did not have blood in her veins, only pure iron. Ronin never would have imagined that such a great commander could smile like that. To him, it was more than clear that she had no memories of the regression, and so he was seeing the true Grand Commander. He remembered the request she had once made of him, that he should ask her not to do anything foolish and instead become a tailor. The swordsman didn't know what to do, and that was a serious problem. Then a boy called out to Adashan, asking her to come check his stance. Another student complained that the towel smelled strange and asked if there wasn't another one. Adation immediately said she would bring a different towel. Ronin noticed that Adation never stayed still and wanted to understand why she was so busy. Those were tasks a servant would normally do, and he couldn't understand why an assistant would act like that. Then a student called out to Ronin, thinking he looked bored, and asked if they could duel. Ronin was confused. Being invited to a duel so suddenly was strange. The boy apologized for inviting him out of the blue and introduced himself as Cardan, explaining that he was a third-year student. He had heard that Ronin had been incredible during the exam, and if the rumors were true, Cardan wanted to learn from him. However, Ronin made it clear that he was busy with something else at the moment. Still, Ronin was polite and suggested that they could have the duel later. Cardan then realized that he had challenged Ronin without bringing his weapon. He immediately shouted at Adashan, calling her a loser right in front of Ronin and ordered her to bring his practice spear as if she were his servant. She simply confirmed that she would do it, saying she would bring the spear in 1 minute. Hearing Cardan treat Adishin like that truly struck a nerve with Ronin. He didn't like it at all that the guy had called his Grand Commander a loser. He wanted to know who that bastard was to dare challenge him and treat her that way. His energy instantly turned completely negative as he wondered who Cardan thought he was. Soon Adishin returned and handed Cardan the spear, leaving him confused. Warning that she had brought a long spear, he started calling her an idiot and wanted to know whether she wasn't aware that he had switched to a short spear. Poor Adishan's voice trembled as she apologized to him, explaining that she remembered him using a long spear until the last class. Cardan then began to smile disdainfully and struck the poor girl on the head with the spear because she had dared to answer him and, in his eyes, a foolish assistant should listen in silence, reminding her that she was someone who didn't even have the right to participate in that class. He threw it in Adishan's face that she had only managed to take part after begging the instructor, so she should at least know how to obey orders and keep quiet. He never stopped humiliating her in front of Ronin. Adishan quickly apologized to Cardan and said she would be more careful, but before Cardan could make any other move, Ronin suddenly advanced and grabbed the spear. The girl was already bracing herself to defend against the next attack, but she was surprised by what happened. Cardan wanted to understand why Ronin was interfering, but Ronin didn't even let him finish speaking and made it very clear that since Cardan wanted a duel, they would have it right then and there. He made it clear that if it weren't done that way, he truly didn't know what he might end up doing. Adishan didn't understand what was happening, and Cardan was also confused. Ronin demanded to know which part the man hadn't understood, speaking with intense anger and ordering the duel to start immediately, calling Cardan a bastard. Cardan admitted that everything was completely unexpected for him, and asked if he had heard that right. Ronin then asked what exactly Cardan didn't like about it. With rage clearly visible on his face, Cardan quickly understood and assumed that Ronin was doing all this for the girl he referred to as a loser. He wanted to know whether Ronin knew her, because if not, he could understand why Ronin was acting this way since both of them were commoners. In the end, he even asked whether the two were siblings. If they were, he truly hadn't known. Ronin, however, quickly released Cardan's spear and told him to start already, ordering him to shut up. He made it clear that if Cardan didn't act immediately, he would end up losing his life. In the next instant, Ronin swung his wooden sword, and Cardan barely managed to withstand the impact on his spear. He couldn't understand what the hell was happening, or how Ronin could put so much strength into his blows without using mana. The impact was so strong that it dragged Cardan several meters backward. Ronin then recalled that just a few minutes earlier, Cardan had been complaining about not wanting to use a spear, so Ronin had fixed it for him. Ronin had simply broken Cardan's spear and asked whether he had liked it. That deeply shook Cardan, who thought Ronin's behavior was incredibly bold. He soon began to show his fury and made it clear that he would put Ronin in his place as he prepared an attack toward the swordsman. He wasn't going to let Ronin get away with what he had done. However, Ronin didn't even move, as he didn't feel threatened at all, until suddenly Cardan's spear was sliced into several pieces. Ronin then calmly told Cardan that he would be fine, and that Cardan Shiwaran should worry about himself instead. Ronin unleashed several slashes despite using a wooden sword, and then delivered a powerful knee strike to Cardan's face. Without wasting time, he followed up with another blow from the wooden sword. In the end, Cardan was unable to do absolutely anything, and fell to the ground like a ripe fruit. Ronin told him he should be grateful they were at the academy, because if this had been outside, Cardan would certainly have lost his life. The other students were deeply shocked that Cardan had lost the duel, especially since he ranked quite high among the third-year students. Ronin then chose the next shameless student, the one holding the towel. The girl was terrified and had no idea what was going on. Ronin said that if the towel smelled, she should wash it herself, and couldn't understand why she was ordering someone else to do it. Ronin asked the girl whether the assistant was her servant. The girl became extremely frightened, and Ronin told her to come over because he was going to break her nose. Adishin quickly begged Ronin to stop, saying she didn't understand why he was doing all of this, but that it was fine, and asking him to calm down. However, Ronin was filled with anger and told the assistant to step aside, saying that he could control himself in many situations, but not when someone belittled her. He said that neither those idiots nor anyone else should do that. He remembered that, at the very least, in the Empire, she was someone who should not be treated that way. Politely, he asked her to move aside, making it clear that he didn't plan to stop until he had beaten everyone who had mistreated her. The girl with the towel began to tremble in fear until the teacher ordered him to stop, but her order was completely different as she began to release her power. She made it very clear that she would not ask Ronin to take responsibility for the duel he had just fought, since accidents can happen in real battles. However, she could not tolerate his behavior, so she ordered him to drop his sword and step away. Ronin soon realized that he could no longer move his body, his eyes widening as he saw that Nabaros practically had the spirit of a serpent. He couldn't believe it, and it was clearly something unprecedented, even for the sword saint. Nabaros's aura was something he had never imagined. The instructor warned him that what Ronin was doing could not be considered a duel. She was responsible for that class and could not allow such a thing to happen during a lesson. Seeing that she did not tolerate disorder, Ronin made it clear that she knew what the assistant had been going through through. He wanted to know whether Nabaros had simply been watching, despite knowing all of this. But the teacher replied that this was between her and the assistant, and that he should not get involved. She told Ronan that this would be her final warning, ordering him to stop. The tension between them grew immense, and Ronan declared that he didn't care whether she was the Sword Saint or not, his answer would remain the same. He then rudely told the teacher to go to hell. Nabaros quickly realized there wasn't much else she could do, so she used the Serpent of Affliction on Ronan. He was left in shock, and in that moment he remembered his great commander. He recalled having asked her about this before, never understanding why she had volunteered for the position of commander when everyone else had refused. He clearly remembered Adishan telling him that one day he would understand that there are some things you simply can't force someone to do. It was just that person's destiny. He remembered her answer vividly and wondered what his great commander had been thinking. He wanted to know what Adishan had been carrying on her shoulders. He also remembered the moment when his great commander told him she was sorry, because she had simply passed that burden on to him, and that she did not want him to forgive her for it. Suddenly, he woke up in a panic on a bed. Adishan was beside him, asking what had happened, and whether he had just had a nightmare. Ronan couldn't understand why his great commander was there, and without meaning to, he ended up calling Adishan by that title. She was confused and asked what he was talking about. Ronan soon realized the mistake he had made and tried to pretend it was nothing. He quickly changed the subject, asking whether that was the infirmary, and Adishan confirmed it, explaining that the staff had decided to bring him there. Adishan then reminded him that the teacher had said she would correct his audacity starting that day during supplementary classes. Ronan realized he had messed everything up. In the end, Adishan asked whether he had gotten angry because of her. The question caught him off guard, and he chose to deny it, explaining that he had only gotten angry because he was sensitive about etiquette and perhaps thought of himself as a respectable gentleman. Adishan made it clear that he was terrible at lying. She asked him not to hate others so much, and included Carden in that as well. It wasn't as if she didn't understand their feelings. Ronan didn't understand what she meant, since it made no sense to him at all. She made it clear that she did her best as an assistant. Since they were on the subject, Ronan asked why she had chosen to be an assistant in that class, and Adishan became a little confused. He then said that he believed she went easy on the students, and that they behaved that way because of her situation. To make matters worse, the teacher had seen everything and done nothing but watch, so he wanted to know whether she wasn't angry. Adishan asked him not to misunderstand, but the reason the teacher did nothing was because Adishan herself had asked her to. Ronan saw no reason for her to do something so foolish. Adishan explained that she was receiving special treatment she did not deserve, because to enter that class, one needed to be a veteran with the sword. She was a year behind and had only just begun to control her mana. After hearing that, Ronan was shocked and completely confused. To him, it was impossible, since his great commander possessed an incredible aura. He couldn't understand how his great commander had gone through something like that. Adishan continued explaining that she had privately asked Nabaros to ignore how the students treated her, and to pretend she wasn't seeing it. After all, Nabaros had accepted her as an assistant, and she didn't want to be an extra burden. She was receiving special treatment, and clearly she needed to bear that burden. She told Ronan that she could endure something like that as many times as necessary, but she was grateful that he had tried to defend her. She admitted that she thought she had grown used to everything, but confessed to him that day it hurt a little. Ronan believed that perhaps the reason she was pushing herself so far was to become a great commander, and Adishan's eyes widened when she heard him say that. She wanted to know how he knew, and whether it was really that obvious. She admitted that she still had a long way to go, and therefore couldn't say it with pride, but she revealed that her dream was to become a great commander of the Empire. She knew it was reckless to say something like that when she was still inexperienced, but giving up was not in her plans. Even in her current situation, she was confident in military science and strategy and was doing her best every day. Soon they heard the siren announcing that it was time for the next class. Adishan wanted the swordsman to rest a little longer, and he didn't disagree. He thanked Adishan for her help, but she told him not to worry and said goodbye. He remained lying on the bed, remembering his great commander asking him that if they ever met again, he shouldn't let her do something foolish like becoming a great commander, but instead go and become a tailor. He began to lament because what Adishan wanted him to do seemed quite complicated. The scene then shifted to a few days later, on the weekend, specifically at the entrance forge of Great Carpadoki. Ronan was there with his two friends and couldn't understand why the place was empty. If they were going to do this, Ronan thought there was no reason to go through the trouble of sending a messenger bird in the middle of the night. He had received a letter saying that the sword was Daron's greatest work and asking him to go there to take a look, but now he wanted to know what kind of terrible service this was. Then he stumbled over a helmet, which made him quite irritated. He thought the blacksmiths should have cleaned the place, so he kicked the helmet hard, believing they had forgotten what customer service was. Maria thought Ronan's nerves were on edge, and Asel suggested that maybe something had happened to him in class. Ronan declared to the two of them that he couldn't wait any longer and that they would go in no matter what. Still, Maria and Asel really didn't understand why he was acting that way. Maria asked if he was sure about what he was doing, but Ronan reminded her that they had called him there anyway, so the two of them should stop talking and just follow him. He went straight to the hidden button in the wall that Didicon had pressed the first time they had come there. The elevator began to operate, leaving Maria and Asel worried while he remained calm. Ronan thought the old man lacked even the basics of customer service. Suddenly, his eyes widened when he found the place in flames. They had no idea what the hell had happened and saw several people lying on the ground. Asel quickly pointed something out for Ronan to look at. There was a stone giant attacking some workers who were trying to flee by any means necessary. Ronan couldn't understand why there was a stone giant there. Asel grew nervous, thinking they should help the blacksmith somehow. Ronan didn't understand where his companion was going with this, but he quickly grabbed Asel around the waist, preparing to jump with him while telling Maria to go back and bring the instructors or anyone she could find. He jumped and told Asel to use telekinesis. Asel did so immediately since he obviously didn't want to die. At that moment, the blacksmiths fell to the ground and the stone giant stood right in front of them. For those workers, it was the end, but Ronan appeared with full force and struck the stone giant, leaving it confused. Ronan thought he had arrived just in time. He had had a lot on his mind in those days and admitted he was very stressed, so he made it clear that the stone giant's little party was over. The stone giant didn't waste time and quickly tried to strike him, but before Ronan could be hit, he made a huge leap and delivered another blow to the giant. The stone giant itself was confused as it hadn't seen Ronan move. The blacksmiths were stunned. They hadn't imagined that Daron's guest was so strong, since destroying stone giants was no easy task. After bringing the stone giant down, Ronan wanted the two blacksmiths to explain what the hell was going on. After a brief conversation, Ronan's eyes widened as he asked whether they were serious. Several stone giants had appeared there suddenly, and the two blacksmiths said they didn't know the cause. The stone giants had emerged from somewhere underground and started destroying everything, killing almost all the blacksmiths there. They also said that the stone giants had captured several blacksmiths, including Daron, and returned to where they had come from. Didicon had gone after the stone giants, but everyone knew he wasn't very good at fighting. If things continued at that pace, Ronan realized the blacksmiths would end up becoming food. He asked whether there were any more stone giants around, and was informed that he had just killed the last one there. Ronan then asked Asel to look for the wounded, since Maria would soon arrive with reinforcements. He also wanted Asel to go with Sita, since it would be very easy to heal the wounded, but Asel asked what Ronan was going to do at that moment. Ronan thought the question was pointless because he was going to save those who had been taken by the stone giants. There was also something he needed to get from Daron. The scene then shifted to Daron thanking Didicon for risking his life trying to save them, though he also thought Didicon didn't need to be there. Didicon stood in front of the dwarf, face to face with several stone giants. Daron only wanted the wolf to run as fast as he could, since he had an invisible armor that could withstand a few impacts. Didicon, however, grew impatient with the dwarf, making it clear that there was a lot going on at that moment and that he couldn't afford to think negatively. He also wanted Daron to have the strength to fight instead of whining, and since he was holding a sword, he should swing it. Daron thought he couldn't do that because it was his greatest masterpiece, and he couldn't simply stain that sword with the crude swordsmanship he believed he had. Didicon thought Daron was a very crazy dwarf for thinking that way. He shouldn't dwell on it, and should just use the sword already. At that moment, the stone giants began to move, and quickly tried to crush the two of them like ants. Daron was shocked and couldn't believe that Didicon had blocked the blow the stone giant had aimed at them. Didicon grew worried, because the defensive enchantment on his armor had already faded. He began to lament, realizing he was going to die like that, wishing he had done everything he had wanted to do before. Regret flooded his mind for all the things he hadn't done. At that moment, Ronan arrived. Didicon saw the stone giant about to attack again, and his eyes widened. Suddenly, the stone giant was struck by several slashes and split in half. Ronan didn't miss the chance to praise Didicon for what he had just done, telling the wolf to rest for a bit and leave the rest to him. Both of them were surprised by Ronan's presence, and Didicon couldn't understand how Ronan had arrived there, since there had been several stone giants along the way. Ronan explained that, as for those, he had killed them all and saved the other blacksmiths. This left everyone completely stunned. Didicon couldn't imagine that such a thing was possible, but Ronan told them to stop wasting time and focus on what was important. He asked Daron to give him the sword, since the one he was using was about to break. Daron didn't quite understand, so Ronan asked to confirm whether the sword the dwarf had called his masterpiece was indeed that sword, as he had heard him say so from afar. Daron quickly confirmed it. In the end, Daron told the swordsman that the hilt was still incomplete, but he could use it. Ronan took the sword and was very grateful, but at that moment, he really wanted to see how good it was. He drew it from its sheath, and the stone giants immediately prepared to attack again. Ronan saw no alternative but to swing the sword, delivering a blow toward the stone giants, who were left unable to react and took the full impact. Ronan himself was quite surprised, and Daron was very happy with the result his creation had just produced. Ronan wanted to know what the hell that was, and Daron asked the swordsman what he thought of the sword he had named La Mancha. He explained that he had taken the name from his favorite dreamer, and when he saw his own reflection in the blade, he found it incredible. He added that it was so light you could barely feel its weight in your hands, and that the material was harder than mithril, meaning it could withstand any swordsmanship. The dwarf also explained that he hadn't placed any enchantments on it, but that it possessed a trait that restored damage by absorbing blood. Ronan asked if that was because it had been made from Sita's eggshell. Ronan then made it clear to the old man that he was incredible, something even the swordsman hadn't expected. The dwarf was happy that Ronan liked it, but Didakon reminded them both that this wasn't the time to be smiling. They needed to leave as quickly as possible, since there was no one left to save. Ronan told Didakon to take Daron and get out of there, explaining that he was going to check something and that it was nothing serious. Still, he believed there was a rat hiding there, a very big rat. Didakon didn't understand what Ronan meant, and Ronan briefly explained that something was strange, since he knew the habits of stone giants. They weren't known to be hostile, and if they weren't provoked, everything would be fine. Ronan had also noticed a very suspicious mark behind the heads of the stone giants, something he had never seen before, a magic circle that left both the wolf and the dwarf surprised. Daron approached to take a closer look, and Ronan asked whether the blacksmith recognized it. Daron wasn't an expert in that field and wasn't sure, but the mana reverberation was very well crafted, and that was the reason the stone giants had gone mad. Soon after that, Daron wanted to know who the hell had done this, and Ronan had no idea, but he believed that, one way or another, it was something he needed to find out. Then the scene shifts to Ronan exploring that place. He kept wondering whether he was right or not, but the more he explored, the more certain he became. Among the footprints of the stone giant, there were also human footprints, and there was even a magical stone defense system. Ronan thought those guys had planned everything very well until something caught his attention. He saw a brightly lit corner and could hear a conversation. He quickly hid, wanting to listen to what those men were saying, when his eyes suddenly widened because he saw something he truly had no idea what it was. It was a massive creature, and just by looking at that scene, he could already tell that those hooded figures were behind everything that had happened. The big problem was what exactly that thing was, because the stone giants he had defeated before looked like children compared to that creature. Ronan also believed that the creature was sealed, but it would soon begin to move. One of the hooded figures then commented that they had intruders. One of them believed this because the brainwashing bond he had cast on the stone giant had been severed, and he thought an intruder had done it. Soon they assumed that the people of the Empire were very quick to respond. They no longer knew what to do because they had no stone giants left, and they could not make the greatest of them all move. Soon, one of the hooded figures thought that he himself should go and kill the intruder. That psychopath's name was Iduan. Another hooded figure warned Edwin that they had destroyed most of the facilities, and that this would affect the Empire's weapon manufacturing enough. However, if their identities were revealed, then things could truly spiral out of control for them. At that moment, the blonde hooded woman thought they should retreat for a while. Her name was Cyrilla. Edouan thought she was far too rigid, but in any case, he believed they had no other choice. Soon, Edouan asked whether he should get rid of what was hidden there, and Cyrilla made it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. Ronan was immediately surprised. Edouan smiled and revealed that the smell of a blacksmith's sparks was already irritating him greatly. Then he hurled flames toward Ronan, who simply blocked the attack with his sword. A massive explosion occurred, and Edouan found it completely unexpected. He wanted to know who that swordsman was who had been listening to their conversation. Edouan even found it surprising that the swordsman had not dodged the attack at that moment. Soon he prepared another ability, suggesting that he bind Ronan's feet so he could not escape. Ronan was surprised because Edouan was materializing a huge amount of magic at an incredibly fast speed, making it clear that Edouan was no ordinary man. In the end, Edouan wanted to understand how Ronan had managed to get there, since their defense system was not easy to break. Ronan made it clear that he was the one who should be asking the questions, and he wanted to know who those two were. He even joked that the two of them were there to have a secret romance. Edouan immediately told Cyrilla that it would be fun to kill such a witty guy, but Cyrilla thought they were simply wasting the little time they had. Edouan, however, believed she was exaggerating far too much and that they should enjoy themselves a bit. After all, that empire would be buried by starlight. Ronan was shocked after hearing those words come out of Edouan's mouth, because he immediately remembered the past, when Ahayute had said the very same thing. He then wanted Edouan to repeat those words, wanting to know whether those two hooded figures were aware of what they truly meant. Edouan, however, could not understand the sudden change in mood the swordsman had shown. Soon, Ronan clarified that those two would be coming with him, because he had many questions for the hooded figures. Edouan thought Ronan was just a crazy kid, and wanted to know whether Ronan truly believed he could capture them. He was already preparing another magical attack, but Ronan rushed toward him and sliced off his arm as if it were mortadella. It happened at such brutal speed that Edouan could not even see it, and Ronan stated that it was indeed possible for him to do something like that. Then Ronan told Edouan to stay very quiet while he beat him senseless. Edouan fell to the ground and began to scream desperately. Cyrilla was shocked because Edouan had not even been able to react. Suddenly, she was grabbed by the neck by Ronan. She immediately became extremely uneasy, and Ronan said he would greatly appreciate it if she answered his questions obediently, if she did not want her companion to meet a worse fate. Cirilla then tried to escape that serious predicament by using her mana shield, managing to force Ronan to release her. Ronan realized then that she would not be obedient. He also noted that her shield was quite sturdy, but he quickly made several cuts into it and shattered it completely. Cirilla could not understand how he had managed to cut through a mana shield, and he swiftly struck her with a blow. Ronan felt no pity whatsoever for those hooded figures, and it was at that moment that he realized she was a half-elf associated with that man, and he wanted to understand just what the hell the two of them were doing. However, something suddenly launched an explosion toward Ronan, and he found it strange. In any case, he had already severed Edouan's limbs and wanted to understand what the hell that was. Edouan had turned into some kind of tree, and to Ronan, the sight was like staring straight into hell. It was extremely unpleasant for him. Edouan was filled with rage, demanding that Ronan stay away from the half-elf, while Ronan believed that Edouan still did not understand what was really happening. Then he struck Cirilla once again with his sword, and Edouan grew furious at what he was witnessing. Ronan immediately stated that the two of them were completely compromised at that moment, and he wanted Edouan to choose. Either he would listen to Ronan obediently, or Ronan would show the elf how she would lose one of her limbs. He even wondered aloud whether hers would grow back, just like Edouan's. Edouan quickly agreed to go with Ronan, and the swordsman thought he had made an excellent choice, saying that he no longer desired any more bloodshed, and that it would also be quite troublesome if the two of them died there. Then he looked at Cirilla and wanted to understand what had happened to her, because she was smiling in a psychopathic manner. He wanted to know the reason for that, until he suddenly noticed a giant hand nearby and was deeply surprised, unable to understand when she had managed to do that. All he could do at that moment was block with his sword, but the impact was enormous. He was sent flying several meters and slammed hard into the wall. Edouan moved closer to the elf and asked whether she could still move. Cirilla replied that she was fine and that she owed him one, because if Edouan had not drawn the swordsman's attention when he pretended to attack, she would not have had the time to use it, at least to disrupt his perception, or even activate the giant. Even though she had only activated the arm, the half-elf was certain that the damage had been significant. Edouan told Cirilla to go to the church and report the situation, making it clear that he would kill that swordsman. The half-elf warned Edouan to be careful, because to her, that swordsman was a monster in the body of a child. Edouan promised he would not be careless, and he was certain that the swordsman was no child. If he did not kill Ronan at that moment, then in the future Ronan could become a great threat, and Edouan could not miss that opportunity. But before he could do anything, he lost his limbs once again and was completely sliced apart, as if he were being prepared for a barbecue. Ronan did not seem to be in a good mood at all. Grape-colored blood sprayed everywhere, and as Edouan's parts fell to the ground, Ronan asked where the half-elf thought she was going. He was certain he had already told her that he had many questions, and he showed her a completely psychopathic expression. Cirilla was terrified, and could not understand how he could be acting like that while being so badly injured. Just as Ronan was about to say something to Cirilla, he suddenly felt something and began to tremble, growing worried because his body was no longer obeying his commands. The half-elf tried to understand how things had ended up like that. She was extremely irritated, but as long as she could not guarantee her victory, she needed to report the situation with maximum priority. She told Ronan to prepare himself, declaring that she would uncover every detail of his life and take everything from him. She would take everything he loved, his family and his friends, and destroy every life he cared about. Ronan did not like that at all. He had been so close to getting a lead, and he could not let the elf escape. If things went as before, everything would go wrong again. He just wanted that elf to stop, and he shouted with all his strength. At that moment, Nabaros suddenly appeared and ordered Cirilla to stop, displaying overwhelming power. Nabaros revealed that she also had many questions, but first she needed to confirm something. Using the serpent's affliction, Nabaros demanded to know who that half-elf was and how she dared to touch her disciple. Professor Nabaros told Ronan that she had heard the details, declaring that he had done a good job. Ronan thought his teacher had arrived at exactly the right time. He also thought it was very good to see her in a place like that. Nabaros did not pay much attention to what he said, feeling that he was merely flattering her. In the end, however, she needed to deal with that half-elf first. Cirilla could see that Nabaros had an aura that took the form of a snake and paralyzed her opponent's entire body. Even so, she felt that she had to escape. Then Nabaros grabbed Cirilla by the face and warned her that she had done things she should never have done. What angered Nabaros the most, however, was the fact that Cirilla had injured her disciple. She told the half-elf to eagerly await the future she would witness with her own eyes. The Serpent of Affliction attacked the half-elf, but in the end, Cirilla only apologized to her stars before collapsing to the ground. Nabaros once again told Ronan that he had done a good job. She also informed the student that after treating his injuries, he should report to the director. Ronan then asked about the future the instructor had mentioned. He wanted to know if she was referring to imprisonment in Laudalan. Nabaros confirmed it, though she did not understand why he was asking. Ronan realized it was exactly as he had imagined. The Fortress of Screams, known as Laudalan, was a prison in the middle of the ocean. It was well known for interrogating criminals who opposed the Empire, using any kind of method to extract confessions. Ronan then asked his teacher whether he could observe the interrogation. Nabaros wanted to understand what he was was talking about, explaining that it was not a place he should go. Ronan, however, grabbed her arm and explained that he wanted to go just once, and that it was truly important to him. Nabaros was slightly surprised by his request. Then the scene shifts to the blacksmiths who had been injured there, as they received medical treatment. Maria was relieved to see that everyone was all right, while Asel, as always, was deeply worried. He only hoped that Ronan would return soon. He did not want to imagine that something might have happened to his friend. Suddenly, Ronan appeared, asking whether one of his two friends had called him. Maria and Asel stood there with their mouths open after his sudden appearance, while he smiled and said that he had heard a summary on his way there and knew that the two of them had done a good job. While Maria brought in more reinforcements, Asel and Sita had saved more than half of the blacksmiths there. Ronan then asked whether his two friends were injured. Maria thought that she should be the one asking that question and wanted to know why Ronan was in such a state. Asel noticed that he was badly wounded and quickly called Sita to treat his injuries, but Ronan said it was all right and that he had already received basic treatment. At that moment, he looked at Iduan and Cirilla and told his two friends that there was still something he needed to do. The scene then shifts to a few hours later, on the secret route to Laudolan, specifically at the cliff of the Grengno forest, where several people had gathered. Nabaros was also there with Ronan. Soon the schools of Laudolan appeared atop their giant birds. A man stepped down from a carriage and greeted Nabaros, informing her that they had been summoned by the Empire to escort the criminal. Nabaros explained that the man possessed an incredible regenerative ability, and that they should keep that in mind during the interrogation. The escort agent replied that the interrogator would be very pleased to hear that. It had been a long time since something as entertaining as what they were receiving that day had appeared. The escort agent then said they were departing and that they would make contact once the interrogation was over. He also asked Nabarose to continue doing her best for the peace of the Empire. Soon they took flight. Nabarose believed that a week should be enough for the two prisoners to start talking in Laudolan. She told Ronan that she would inform him as soon as she received contact and that he should be ready to leave at any moment. She asked whether that was enough, and Ronan agreed, thanking her for the opportunity. After all of that, time passed quickly, and the restoration of Carpadoki progressed rapidly thanks to the Empire's assistance. Ronan returned to the Empire and spent his time receiving supplementary lessons from his teacher. Then the scene shifts again to a few days later at the Fortress of Screams, Laudolan, where screams and groans could be heard everywhere. While a prisoner was undergoing dental treatment, the escort agent began to lament, saying that he had been so entertained that he had almost forgotten. It was nearly time for their guest to arrive. The scene then shifts to one of the prison's staff members welcoming Nabaros and Ronan. The man revealed that he was the interrogator in charge of the new criminal, and also the one responsible for showing the place to Ronan and his teacher. His name was Karaka. He asked whether the two of them wanted to see the criminal first. Nabaros confirmed, as they wanted to hear the details of the interrogation. Karaka then asked them to follow him, but Ronan felt that something strange was going on. The idea that such an old man was an interrogator at Laudolan was unexpected to him, and he truly did not trust it. Nabaros found it amusing, as everyone said the same thing when they first saw Karaka. She asked her student not to judge a book by its cover, because he would soon find out for himself. That old man was known there as the worst nightmare. They then walked down the corridor, and Karaka informed them that the cell was not very far, and that he would give them a brief summary. He explained that the first thing that needed to be said was that those two were part of an organization called Nebula Clausier. Nabarose was hearing about that organization for the first time, and asked whether it was a criminal organization like Caliboro. Karaka confirmed it, adding that the difference was that they were even more dangerous. From the great fire that destroyed Nalan's barn to the explosion at the Magical Engineering Research Facility in Yedamen, it had been confirmed that they were behind all those previously unexplained incidents. Ronan truly had not expected it to be such an obvious organization, and he had never heard of it in his past life. Karaka told them that more details would be provided through the reports. Then Ronan asked the old man whether that organization used the term Starlight, or perhaps Advent of the Star. Karaka immediately replied that he had never heard of that before. Ronan grew thoughtful and explained that he had heard certain things when he captured those people, and that he believed they were connected to their objective. He wanted to know whether the two prisoners had said anything about it. However, Karaka simply put on his mask, and Ronan felt that the atmosphere had completely changed. Karaka soon realized that he had exposed his flaws during their first meeting, and now he felt ashamed of it. To Karaka, it seemed that he had not shown his full sincerity, and he had no choice but to push himself even further. Ronan then saw the two of them inside the cell and could not believe they were the same people he had seen before. Edwin and Cirilla were in a completely deplorable state. Karaka informed them that Edwin was impressive. He used a specialized dark magic to regenerate his own body. Karaka explained that it was very easy to deal with Edwin. All one had to do was keep burning him until he could no longer regenerate. After that, it was simply a matter of cutting off his limbs and putting all one's effort into it while continuing to burn him. Karaka told the teacher and her student that they would become Edwin's best friends after doing that. To make matters worse, he even pointed the heated spear at them. However, Karaka felt that Edwin was hiding something, and this left him deeply disappointed. He grabbed Edwin by the the hair and asked whether they had not agreed to be sincere with one another. Eduan fell into despair, insisting that he had told everything he knew. Karaka could no longer believe him, because he had just heard something about the advent of the star. Eduan did not know what to say, and Karaka made it clear that he was willing to finish Eduan off because of his disappointment. In contrast, Cirilla did not possess regenerative abilities like Eduan, so Karaka was not as concerned about her. In the end, she could die if he continued to oppress her, and the half-elf began to tremble just from hearing her own name. At that moment, Eduan only wanted Karaka to kill him. Ronan was deeply shocked, as he had never seen anything on that level, not even when he had been a soldier. Still, he could not understand how Eduan managed to hide things even in a situation like that. In any case, their identities had already been exposed, and Ronan assumed that instead of Eduan refusing to say it, perhaps he was unable to say it. Karaka's eyes widened at that realization. Nabaros did not quite understand at first. Ronan knew that Nabaros was aware of the methods used on soldiers to hide secrets and prevent information leaks, namely a forbidden curse. Ronan thought that this might be the case with those two as well. Karaka was greatly shocked, because that day had been deeply humiliating for him, and he felt utterly betrayed. He had never imagined that he could have overlooked something so obvious. Soon, Karaka asked the two guests to wait for a moment, as there was something he needed to fetch. A few minutes later, the scene shifts, and Ronan saw that Karaka had returned with something terrifying. He wanted to know what the hell it was. Karaka explained that it was a cursed eye, essentially a monster that devours curses. For criminals who are unable to speak during interrogation because of curses, the cursed eye was extremely useful. Karaka then approached Eduan and placed the cursed eye directly on his forehead. Eduan was terrified and wanted to know what the hell that thing was. Karaka told the cursed eye that it could eat as much as it wanted, because he would release it soon. Eduan began to feel intense pain as the cursed eye started to glow. Then Karaka said it was finished and that he would ask once again. He asked what the advent of the star was. Eduan explained that the star was an eternal entity, the only grace that would save the lesser creatures of that world, like small lights waiting for the advent of the star to begin in the heavens. Cirilla was utterly shocked by what she heard. Eduan clarified that they worked to ensure that nothing could interfere with their long-standing desire, and the half-elf demanded that he shut his mouth immediately. Karaka thought that Eduan had spoken far too much for an old man's patience, and said it would be better to simplify things. He wanted to know whether something was going to fall from the sky soon, and what exactly it was. Eduan replied that it was the child of the stars, and Ronan's eyes widened, because he knew that Eduan was talking about Ahayut.